Today is August 8th. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche Chestokomaki. My name is Red Thunder Woman, or in Satudene, Dikots, Nikotine Siku. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she and her pronouns. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed U.S.-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. North of the border are the Siksika, Gunai, and Bagani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Wesley, Chiniki, Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina Nation. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. It's just really important to understand, with Pride coming up here in Calgary, that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so-called time of reconciliation. And with that, I want to introduce our guest, Jessie. I'm really grateful that you were willing to come to our book club today, Jessie. Thank you so much for being here. I definitely open the floor to you, and I think I'm going to put you on the pin, and hopefully everybody sees you front and center.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
Can't hear you, but I do see that you're speaking, and somehow our closed captioning is picking it up.
Can everyone else hear me?
I'm the only person having audio. I'll check mine. Please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm very happy to be here, and always nice to meet people who've read the book, and I'm happy to hear what everyone is thinking. So thank you for having me. Hopefully Michelle will resolve her technical issues. When secret about the CBC, if you let dead air go too long on CBC radio, there's this, it used to be a tape when I was there. I'm sure it's now just a computer program, but there's this tape that is triggered to go off because there's like, you can't have, I think it's like 10 seconds or 20 seconds of dead air, and then it triggers this thing, and this taped broadcast, which is just you're listening to the CBC sort of thing. And so you always, when I was starting out, they warned you about this. They would take you to the radio master control to show you this machine that was going to go off if you dared let 20 seconds of dead air go out. But then I remember that they also told the story that Michael Snow, the famous Canadian artist, had done a radio piece that was like minutes long, dead air, earlier, that had made this thing go crazy. So there was all these horror stories about when people intentionally wanted dead air, you had to call master control to say it was. Anyway, in Zoom, with this technology, it's a whole new world. Hopefully Michelle is back up and running.
I'm back. I can hear you. Hooray.
Okay, good.
I can see Cynthia wants to speak first, so I'm assuming she heard us say that Indigenous people speak first. So I'm going to assume that and let her speak to you first.
I am non-Indigenous, but I feel like I have a lot of, I would say, good points, in my opinion, my humble but informed opinion. Your book is really well titled, like Unreconciled. I believe that the actual title of the book is Unreconciled, but the hidden title, the one that you didn't do as the subtitle, should be Let's Decolonize, because when you look at it, he was arguing that we shouldn't reconcile because there's nothing to reconcile. What he was trying to suggest is there needs to be an attempt to decolonize, not to reconcile. And I think you stressed that a lot in the last chapter, Unreconciled, in the sense that you questioned like the relationship. You said it wasn't like, you said that the relationship wasn't always perfect to begin with because it was a colonial relationship. And you're suggesting that we have to decolonize out of that colonial relationship and build a new anti-colonial relationship.
Well, thank you so much for reading the book. I appreciate that very much. I think that's about it. Although, I mean, I don't know if I would use the word decolonize. It's a word that's used a lot. Sometimes I think it's appropriate. A lot of the time, because I think the struggle is, of course, that colonial systems, colonialism, doesn't really have it built into it the ability to undo itself. It sort of it requires this sort of, because colonialism is ultimately a tool of capitalism, and capitalism, the way it has been set up, requires constant growth. That's why they needed colonialism, was that in order to expand, they needed to conquer other lands. So I find it hard to imagine that these states will decolonize. So you're right. It's just maybe not the language precisely that I would use. And the last chapter was the easiest one to write. To be honest, it's like where I got to, I tried to find a balance of tone in the book. And in the last chapter, and I remember saying this to my editor, even as I was writing it, and my agents just saying, yeah, the sort of scorched earth comes in the last chapter. It's still, I think, hopeful, but it's a pretty blunt sort of assessment, I think, of it. And the assessment is that, like, Canada as a thing was never really constituted in a way to make it succeed. And it meaning that, like, the way for Canada to exist legitimately is for the First Nations people, Inuit, Métis people, to go, sure, we can do that. Which amazingly, even after all these many years, would probably still be a possibility, amazingly, that Indigenous people wouldn't say no to that proposition. We'd probably figure out how to make it work. Because again, that's what my great-grandparents actually believed it, was that there was this way to make this work, that the abundance of this place could sustain everyone, and that they, if you look at the treaty that their community signed, and just from what I know of them, the idea that one community, that somehow there would be dominion, or that we were giving up the, sovereignty, was not that is not what they believed in terms of what was occurring. They sort of believed peoples had shown up, their way of life was changing. For sure, my great-grandparents absolutely believed that like their way of life was forever going to change, but they saw great possibility. I would say their families learned to have some anger over how that all worked out for everyone. But I think they entered it in sort of good faith. It just didn't work out that way. So yeah, I think there's a way to reconstitute, and that I literally think that's the right word, because you need a new constitution to reconstitute Canada in a way that would be legitimate, that would require a fundamental shift in the relationship between the state and certainly our communities. Like, if we talk about nation to nation, we really get down to that, and it would require, because again, if we had that, would Canada have made all the decisions it has made over the last? And the answer, of course, is no. Of course not. It wouldn't have made all. May have made some of them, but I don't know if it would have made all of them. And I can't help but, in my imagination or my dreams, sometimes imagine what that could look like. Because again, I think one of the things with Indigenous people is, like, this is it. This is our homelands. I have nowhere else to go. I can't imagine another paradise. This is it. This is, and it's totally enough for me as someone who can go. I was on Manitoulin just a few weeks ago, and like, yeah, it's enough. Like, that's the Anishinaabe. That's the big unceded territory in the Anishinaabe territory is Manitoulin Island, and it's wonderful. Everyone should, actually, set that. People should know that it exists, is maybe how I would put that. I don't know if everyone should go there, but you should know that it's fabulous and that it's a lovely place. But so yeah, I just think that I just wanted to push Canadians, and probably non-Indigenous Canadians, not that Indigenous people are Canadian to begin with, but Canadians, to sort of dream that way and imagine what that might actually be, and sort of get over the fear that it would mean some radical shift in your life, because I honestly don't think it really would, like too much. It might just mean that there's some things work a bit differently. And I also think we shouldn't be daunted by it. That one of the interesting things about how colonial states teach their own history is, and I think it's very intentional when I think about it, is they sort of teach the people who found their nations, they sort of treat them like gods. Like in the States, they literally cut mountains with them and stuff like that. They have giant phallic symbols in honor of them in their state capital. Here we sort of don't, but we still treat them like they were not human somehow, like they're not. And then we treat their output, like the things they did, as somehow sacrosanct. Like we can't. These are immutable. These things. And I don't think they're just not immutable. They're not. I don't know. I've been in the territory where Michelle calls home right now. Like you go stare at a mountain, that's immutable. Like that's a thing that you like that's a thing. That's realness in a way that a lot of this stuff is not. And so yeah, I just think we can. Those folks weren't so great that we can't redo some of their work if we've decided that it's not working out. And I think our communities have sort of decided it's not really working out that great for us. So why not? Why is that so daunting and so hard? And the cherry that I would put on top for Canada is, Canada, it seems to me, as a nation, has always really wanted to be thought well of globally. It always wants to be cool and nice and good and a leader in a way that is tough for us, for a vast nation, but a very small population. It's tough, right? And this would be a thing that it could do that would be historic in all of the world, because no one else has ever done it. If you were to say, maybe we should reconstitute and reorganize ourselves to acknowledge that colonialism, the doctrine of discovery, this is why everyone wants the Pope to get because we want to repudiate the very bedrock of what made all of this happen, and just admit that maybe it could have worked out different, and can we just maybe reset now? That's a very long answer to, I suspect, what was a very sort of short question, but that was I think you nailed what I was going for, which is that maybe reconciliation isn't the goal. And maybe it's actually not possible for these nations to reconcile in that way. So if that's not possible, how can we get to a better place? And it's in reconstitution, or that sort of idea of let's do something different and not be that afraid of it. And again, from the Anishinaabe perspective, we have prophecy that sort of tells us, how this all sort of goes. I am surprised at the accuracy so far. So it's also something where we know that, we will govern the lands again. We will steward the lands again at some point. So we also have to prepare ourselves for that eventuality, because I do also think we're watching colonialism is having a pretty tough time at the current moment in terms of its outlook, which is a problem when you build a system that isn't sustainable. But now we're getting into other stuff, and I want to leave questions for other folks. And as you can tell, I'm verbose.
Well, thank you, Jesse, for that. I have so much I want to say to you as well. I'm super excited to, but Susan has her hands up, and I know she's Métis. And I'm just going to remind everybody, the reason why Indigenous speak first is because frankly, you've had over 150 years. So as well-meaning as your questions may be, I just ask that you allow Indigenous to speak first. And Susan, please go ahead. And if you need me to pause it, I have no problem doing so. Oh, did she freeze on us maybe?
I want to guess the first this full book. Very read the sense of humor, our community.
Oh no. Oh no, she
Yeah,
dropped.
I think she bounced in and out. I even stopped my video hoping it wasn't just that. But when she comes back in, I'll admit her right away. And I heard her talk about your humor. And yes, that was like so prevalent throughout the entire one.
She's back.
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Let her go here. I don't see her.
Oh no.
Explain
Hear her
that
quite
family,
yet.
my ancestor.
Darn it. Kathy Bear, do you want to pop in at all, or should I go on about with my review?
Sure, I can talk, but it
What's-
sounds like Wendy's trying to talk.
One.
Okay, I'm going to change the view so I can maybe pause everybody or mute folks that are not speaking, so that way we can get. It looks like everybody's muted. So the only people that's not muted, even Jesse's muted. So if Susan turns her camera off, her signal will be better. Agreed, but I don't think she's, oh, like I don't know if that's going to help her right now. So maybe when Susan gets that kind of sorted out, I'll just pass it over to Kathy for now, so that we don't
There's
waste
Susan.
time.
Oh, maybe not.
Yeah, she's here, Kat. Everyone, we all agree she's here, but she's cutting in and out. So I would really just like Kathy Bear to be given the floor for now, and hopefully Susan's connection will come back sooner. Thanks, folks.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kathy Bear. I'm from Muscoda Cree First Nations. I just finished your book. I started it yesterday. It's very good. I really enjoyed it. There's lots of good information there, and a lot of it really resonated with me. When you talk about not feeling good enough or Indigenous enough, that really resonated a lot with me. Also, I get nervous when there's a celebrity in the house.
So do I. When does one show up?
Yeah. The part where you talk about knowing I'm the exact type of Indian that residential schools were designed to produce, and that I'm considered tolerable by a system bent on eradicating Indigenous existence, is an uncomfortable, even painful thing to live with. It's not an identity I aspire to. It's been imposed, and imposed in a way meant to seduce, numb, and coerce me into playing along, into fully embodying the image of an Indigenous person in which I've been cast. I've had to deal with that imposition a lot in my life, and my first step in managing it has always been to ask myself a simple question. Are you going to actually be the acceptable one? Or are you going to raise hell and find a way to weaponize your privilege against the very place that's given it to you? That really resonated with me because, you know, I was taken away from my mother. I was raised by a German father. And even though he was like really old, he was born in 1911. So like, how in the world would they take me away from my mom and give me to this old man to be raised because he's white? It just, I've been very conditioned to be acceptable, like, you know, to be the only Indigenous person in elementary school, to just being called squaw, like, you know, like when when you get in a fight in a playground, to be called squaw, to one time walk into school in elementary school. Well, I don't want to go there. That's a just, even in elementary school, the two boys tried to rape me. They lured me into a garage. They were going to molest me in there. Like, that's in elementary school. That's how prevalent this kind of conditioning is. It just, and you push all of this down and bury it inside of you, because of all the trauma and the beat downs that you take throughout your life, that really resonated with me, because I've always spent so much time trying to be accepted, trying to not pass as white, but just to be accepted. And no matter what you do, you don't. So, now that I'm getting close to 60, I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't give a fuck what people think about me. I'm going to be me. I'm going to say what I want to say. What more can they do to me that already hasn't been done, right? Mm. So that really resonated with me. And then again, in relating to that, when you go to the last chapter, and it starts with 2 generations. I forget. Mm. All that effort Canada put into forcing my family's estrangement from our land, divorcing us from our community, all that money and violence, and that all it got them was 2 generations, my mother and me. That's it. All the work to drive my grandmother away, to brutalize her into a life in the city, and yet her great-granddaughter wants to move back to the res. Like, that was very nice. I found that really hopeful and kind of empowering. But I find, like, for myself, I've recently found out about an auntie that never made it home from residential school. So over the past 4 or 5 months now, I've been thinking a lot about what my grandmother went through. And I just hope that on my res, I have a cousin here. They're on their way home from my res in northern Saskatchewan to Vancouver, so they're stopping for the night. They're just coming back from the powwow, and I just found out tonight that we're considered the white res because we have so little culture left on my res. I find that really sad, but I'd already kind of noticed that, because when I was there for a funeral not that long ago, I asked, how many elders do we have left? And I was told at that time we had 1 left. And I've never heard of any, besides the powwow, I haven't heard of any like sweats happening on my res or anything like that. So I just hope that maybe we can start how do you go about borrowing culture? Like, how do you relearn your culture? That's a hard thing, right? Do you just borrow it from your neighboring people, or what? But there was one more thing in here. I had one of the what the fuck moments when I was reading your book. It was like when you were talking about the Appropriation Prize. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because like that was just in 2017, and it totally just went like right over my head. I never heard a thing about it. So I'm just hoping you could take a few minutes and talk about that. Thanks.
Sure. But first of all, Kathy, thank you so much for sharing and all of your thoughts. That's that's very powerful, and I really appreciate that. And I'm so sorry for everything that you've been through. I mean, I guess I would say about the not feeling Ojibwe enough, or I guess, even since the book, my thinking on this has sort of moved a bit, which is like, that's a very intentional outcome of colonialism. Like that, they wanted us to feel that way, right? Mm-hmm. Just like they also wanted to empower people who aren't from our communities to feel like they could be part of our communities, right? All of that is sort of part of the same sort of circle. And none of it is fun for anyone really involved. And thanks to a lot of therapy, a lot of discussions with elders and all sorts of things, I've really grown in my acceptance of myself in terms of, when I think of the title of the book, it's both about the country, but it was also very much about me in terms of understanding what it does mean to be an Anishinaabe guy who has, white dad, a huge part of the white family, but grew up in the city, but also grew up very, very connected to my community. We always knew who we were. And, I haven't had, unlike some of my cousins or whatever, like, as you can probably see, I haven't really benefited from being able to pass as white for very often in my life. I talk about in the book how the kids, just like you, told me right away that they knew all about me right away. So but it's something an elder told me was really powerful. He just said, you are Anishinaabe, you can't help it. Everything you do is the honest, that's how an Anishinaabe would do it, because that's who you are. You are wrapped up, even the idea that you're wrapped up in questioning that is just being wrapped up in what colonialism wants us to do. And he's like, what you actually have to do is just accept that that's who you are, because that's how we understand you. That's how your community sees you. That is you. Don't worry about anyone else in your family. You are you, and that's who you are. And he always reminded me, your community knows who you are. And even for those that are lost or were taken, the communities still know in a lot of cases. Like there is memory there in terms of understanding how all of this worked. So we are enough. What we do is enough. We are making our ancestors proud as we go through all of this. The story with my daughter was, what a benefit being an incredibly slow author turned out to be. This book took 4 years for me to write. It was supposed to take a year. In between, I did start sort of a whole not-for-profit and do some other stuff that delayed the writing that I do talk a bit about in the book. But, that experience with her going back, that wouldn't have happened if I had finished the book on time, quote unquote, which was also a good teaching, which is that the whole concept of on time is different for us, and to be more accepting, which I do understand, but sometimes when you've got agents and other people, they have a different version of on time. And but I would say the book arrived right when it should have, and part of it was to get some of those stories, and she still feels that way. Like all these years later, that was 2019, I think that happened. Like it's 2022, and she this week she's like, why do we live in the city? And my answer is, I don't know. Talk to your mom, which I don't mean to put on my wife, but I've grown weary of the city as well. The Appropriation Prize, I don't want to go into the whole backstory of it. It was a nasty little thing in Canadian publishing world where the writers trust, which is like the union of writers, had a publication that was dedicated to Indigenous writers, but the non-Indigenous editor wrote an editorial about how cultural appropriation isn't real, and wouldn't it be great if we just all we should have an appropriation prize for the writer who writes best in the body of another culture. And it's blew up. All the authors were very upset. And then of course, overnight, a bunch of publishers in Canada, all the major gatekeepers tweeted on the app that no one should use because it's nothing but a disaster. Tweeted out, because again, these people, if they hadn't had Twitter, they could have just thought these things in their brains and not done whatever they did. It was not a good career move for many of them, but a lot of them said, yes, I would contribute to the founding of an appropriation prize. And then at the time, I was more engaged in Twitter, and so I tweeted back, I think something like, there already is an appropriation prize, it's called Canada, which is sort of how I sort of feel about it. And anyway, there was a whole brouhaha. I appeared on a TV show to debate a guy, didn't go well for him. Appeared on another radio show where I got emotional, and then a bunch of people watched it. And then it seems every publisher in the country decided I should suddenly write a book. And now we're at a book club meeting. So that is, if you want the trajectory of my involvement with the Appropriation Prize, that's sort of it. I think more importantly for me, though, it got me to think about the issue and to start talking a bit about it from our perspective, which is to talk about narrative sovereignty as opposed to cultural appropriation. Cultural appropriation I find very boring, and it's not our thing, really. In terms, like, I don't, Anishinaabe weren't really known for it. Maybe I don't want to speak for all First Nations, but so, but narrative sovereignty would be our thing in terms of like, we're sovereign people, and we think that's how this would work. And so it just allowed me to talk from it, which has been very useful advocacy to think about it that way. The Indigenous Screen Office, like so much, and I don't want to say because of that, but it's helped me in that work to frame it that way and to not have to feel like I have to talk about colonial ideas all the time. I can talk about our ideas in the context and move their needle, move their thinking in terms of what we're actually talking about. Because when you say narrative sovereignty, especially to ministers from Quebec, it hits a bit differently than talking about, we don't want cultural appropriation, because you're talking about something we do want, so a positive outcome, and the words are different. And I know that sounds silly, but in a lot of advocacy work, the precise words are meaningful, because that's the difference between a politician going, oh, I can use that, or no, I don't want to talk about that. And so it's been very useful, and it's certainly not, I wouldn't claim ownership of the concept or anything like that. It's just how I ended up framing it. So to me, it's one of those things. It was, and this all happened during 2017, important because it was the sesquicentennial year, which if you were First Nations or Métis or Inuit during 2017, not a highlight, not except we did ruin the party. I will say that was good. We successfully thumbs up on that one. Everyone did not have a lot of fun that year, but I don't think we're sort of fun people, so it's a bit of a drag that's how it had to work out. And I do think it's beneficial that Canada Days ever since are a bit more fraught for this place, because they probably should be a bit fraught in terms of like, is it, just, like, I mean, I get that we're still a country that's gonna like fireworks for like a queen that's been, whatever, but I don't know about celebrating Canada Day. I just think there's other ways that we could think about those things. I'm all for the day off. We all need that, but yeah, so that's really the Appropriation Prize story, at least from my vantage point. Sadly, some of the people that I encountered during that still hold a grudge, apparently. One of them recently wrote something quite horrible about me and whatnot. But it was quite amusing. It turns out that it seems they've discovered that I have a book, these people, which I don't know how they missed it. It was a bestseller and everything. And but they read it, and it turned and they it's a very interesting experience to hear people read the things you wrote as if it's a gotcha, like because the big one, yeah, exactly, Michelle, because it was all about how I'm like 3/4 white, which is just a bizarre, like, my ask would be like, can you point to the 3/4, because you want to come up to my community and have all the men gather together, because it's not gonna go well on that one, on the 3/4. But like, so I don't know what leg or arm they're talking about necessarily, but it's also like, but that's what I wrote. Like, I wrote that in the book. Like, you can't get me on something I wrote. And like, then they write, oh, he's privileged. And I'm like, yeah, there's like a whole chapter on that shit in the book. Like, I write about the privilege, its relationship to whiteness. So anyway, all this to also just say, I don't even, they used to be like, don't feed the trolls. I don't even think you should bother, like, even I don't know what these people are up to with their time. who has the time or energy with what's going on in the world to do, like, this woman wrote a whole like 1,500 word essay about, like, it's like, my goodness. Anyway, so that was the Appropriation Prize story. It's a sort of weird and ugly moment, I would say, for them, but a learning. It was a teachable moment, as it turns out, for the country, because we don't. I think cultural appropriation is something a lot of the most institutions here are now deeply aware of after that conversation, and sort of comically desperate not to be accused of. Even though I think there's a big misunderstanding of what it actually is in Canada, because I think, and frankly, our community labels a lot of stuff cultural appropriation that isn't. Like I'll just use a very simple one: sports mascots. Yeah, not cultural appropriation. We did not have sports teams. We did not have mascots for the non-existent sports teams that we didn't have in that way. It doesn't mean we didn't have athletics. Of course we did, but not in the way that would require a foam-headed person to run up and down the sidelines of whatever we were doing. So it's like, no, that's not actually that's just gross racism is what that is. Like, that's not culture, that's just gross. And then the other one, I loved this interaction. The CBC called me, it was like a year ago, and they're like, oh, we have to have you on. There's a big cultural appropriation thing, and you're the expert, which is just not a way to lead a successful booking call with me, is to say you're the expert on culture. No, I will. You are not. That booking is not happening if you open that way up. But then they were like, a non-Indigenous T-shirt company has stolen the T-shirt design of an Indigenous person, and we think it's cultural appropriation. And I was like, that seems like IP theft. I don't remember the long tradition of T-shirt making that we're talking about here exactly. Like, maybe if there's a symbol or something, but to me, this is like, and I said to the guy, you should just book an IP lawyer. Like, there's Indigenous IP lawyers who will happily come on and say, you shouldn't do this. And it's like, we'll sue you and all of that stuff. I'm not an IP lawyer. I'm not like, so that isn't cultural appropriation either. To me, the best example, if people truly want to understand cultural appropriation, I could go the potlatch fan route. I won't. I'll go a much more simpler route, the dream catcher. You've seen them at the Dollarama, made in China, the thing everyone hangs in their car for reasons I as an Anishinaabe, it comes from our nation. No idea. It's not how it works. It means you're sleeping in your car. Maybe you are. It's very whatever, do you. Not sure. And by the way, not going to work if you bought them at the Dollarama. Like, these are actually like things that do a thing that actually works if you use it properly. Dollarama, not going to happen. So like, there you have a very specific cultural item from a nation, right, that actually has a pretty specific cultural meaning and practice and a whole like protocol and ceremony around it, right? Like, when they come out of use, you burn them. Like, there's a whole thing. I don't need to go into it, but there's a whole thing that around dream catchers. And typically the person should know you who makes it for you, because it will work better. Like, you can get them where they don't. I don't want to say that, but typically they should make it for you. Like, the one I have in our room was made for me. Unbelievable. But there you have a thing that has turned into this cultural like product that our nation benefits zero from. It's been stripped of all of its actual context. So no one who, like, the vast majority, 99% of the people who have one in their car, no idea about what it means, what you're supposed to do with it, how you clean it, upkeep, nothing. It wasn't made by us, so we benefit no financially. Culturally, we don't bet. It's a racial, like that. There you go. Like, that's what we're talking about. And there's tons of it. The canoe, sunglasses. Like, there's tons of stuff that our folks were doing that are now not that would have been like if we actually had ever had a free market capital system, like, the Anishinaabe Nation would be rich from dream catchers. It would the Inuit, like the kayak, would they be lousy with the kayak? The money the kayak design, the patent they would have gotten on the kayak. you know what I mean? But we didn't, so we're locked out of it. And I think that's that enriching yourself from others' cultural property without permission, without reciprocity, that's appropriation. And Canada, as I said in the radio piece, is literally built on it. Like, and not just cultural, physical, our bodies, the land, our lives. Canada appropriated all of it in order to serve itself. And so the fact that cultural appropriation, you know, the idea that we even debate that it's a thing is laughable. It's like, what are we talking about? Of course, this is what's occurred, you know, right across this these lands. And you know, and I come back to Kathy's comment, you know, how do you recover a culture? This is where we've been left, right? Where we have to ponder these very difficult questions. I don't have the answer. I mean, my community's lucky. We still have elders. The powwow came back, like 30 years ago, which you think about it, like it only came back 30 years ago, right? Like you think that's a long time. It isn't. I was a teenager when the community started doing powwows again for the first time. They have a language camp. Like they've still got it. Like it's still there in the community, even though it's such a small place, like 350 people in Ganabajing, but they still have that, and they're taking care of it. But so many don't, and it's just, you know, hopefully, Kathy, your community can find a way, and I think there will be. I am very positive that we will get it all back in terms of one way or another. We will get it all back, and I probably won't live to see it, but I you know, it helps me sleep that I do believe that that's what will occur, because again, we persevered through all of this. There's something to there's a reason why this hasn't been easy. So if we're here, that means there's something left for us to get up to.
Thank you so much.
That's awesome.
Boy, I better shorten these answers. This is going crazy.
No, you don't. That you're allowed to speak. You've had 150 years of silence. Your ancestors saying.
Yeah, I'm not that old. I don't have that much. Easy now.
Susan, do you want to give it one more go? Maybe what we'll do is ask everybody to turn off their cameras and see if that can help Susan be able to have a conversation here.
Sound like, can you hear?
Darn it.
No?
Maybe write the question in chat. Would that work?
Can you hear?
No, we can't hear you. I'm sorry,
No.
Susan.
So
You're just
sorry.
kind of cutting in and out. I'm so sorry.
Sorry. Difficulties.
Wanted to give that a go.
This is why we need to have internet service treated like a utility,
Yeah.
so that we would have high-speed access for
Stable
high-speed access.
It's so hard, Jesse, because you know I'm a liberal and we actually passed this policy, and yet here we are still. So, you know, it's like, it's so much harder when you know, and this is too why Indigenous people speak first, is just to try to give that space, because it's so hard. That's a good suggestion, Carrie. Susan, can you try calling in?
On the phone.
I'll accept your, well, no, it's you. Let's put it that way. In the meantime, Jesse, so that concept of narrative sovereignty that you really spoke about, like, I have been afraid to do book reviews. I encourage the non-Indigenous to do the book reviews always, because I'm sure you've seen all the racists that, like, all the Ks that get out there and write all these racist book reviews. Right. So I always ask this group that every time that they like a book, that they write a good review. And I also encourage people who just don't like a book just to not write the review, because Indigenous people don't need negativity, right? And I follow a lot of authors, and they all want to know if you really like their book. So I always feel really embarrassed to how to talk about it. So like I wrote a review for you for the first time, and I'm like, because I just felt like we had so much in common. So for all the folks that are here and maybe missed it, I'll just quickly say it. To my guest, Jesse, I've never prepared a speech for a guest like this one. Your words in your book, Unreconciled, actually gave me permission to say a book review. I've always suffered from imposter syndrome. As an adult, I've learned to challenge that thinking, recognizing childhood trauma as the root of that insecurity. And I know it's not true, but there are times it's a full-time job challenging that negative self-talk, especially when triggered. With the deepest respect to all my past authors, Jesse's book was the first one that I personally resonated with in a long time. Much of it is because we're close in age. So when I was reading his thoughts on Star Wars, I made my daughter and my husband stop what they were doing to read out loud his words as validation to my endless points on Star Wars. Out of all of the things I could have said, I focused on the Star Wars, but I encouraged them all to read this book, as I do all non-Indigenous. When I was asked by a Catholic public school in Lacombe to speak, I placed myself back in the grade in Sylvan Lake, not too far from Lacombe, to think of all of the racism and sexism that I had experienced. And Oka was the instant pain in that gut that I thought of, and wrote a message as if there was a one or two half-breed full breeds in that class that might have that feeling of all eyes on them for being the one Indigenous kid expected to put up with all their school's ignorance while still trying to deal with all the hormones and experiences that any other preteen or teen goes through. No one likes being singled out negatively. And because I'm an adult that is beginning to understand racism, intersectionality, I try to include new immigrants and the LGBTQ2+ community, but likely miss things like disability. Again, I'm committed to work harder on all intersections despite my straight cis and ableist biases. Jesse's description of Oka made me feel like his and my Indigenous generation that nationally went through those times had that commonality, without taking away how awful it was for the actual Indigenous folks at Oka. Even when I said it to the Lacombe kids, I felt like an imposter because I wasn't at Oka. That wasn't my community. But that racism, I felt that others did too. And it wasn't okay then, it's not okay today, but I needed to read that and validate it because I bet many Indigenous kids, preteens, teens, and young adults are likely feeling that today in a time of so-called truth and reconciliation, that all eyes are still on them and how hard it is to go through this without understanding, help, or worse, denialism, like the K's and their, Appropriation Prize. There's a conservative movement here in Calgary that is purposely trying to do Indian residential school denial. Anyway, I want those younger than I to know that this is an experience we all go through as Indigenous people that is completely unfair, unjust, and uncompensated for. This book helps articulate all of this. I believe all Indigenous peoples across so-called Canada should read this book. Of course, non-Indigenous should too. It helps validate Indigenous experiences. So I hope you see your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, parents, and communities struggle figuring out our identity, relationship to Canada, the healing we all have to go through, and it's unfiltered. I cried and I laughed at times and found this book so healing. My hope is you all do too. It's loving, respectful, funny, compassionate, and full of the integrity that I see all around me in the Indigenous communities that I know and love. Even this book gives me permission to write, speak, or podcast in my way. I would love to tell you, all Indigenous, that your words and way of being is more than enough. And yet for myself, I'm my worst own colonizer enemy. But this book is another tool in my toolbox to release some of that self-doubt. And I hope it is for you too. And so I wanted to say that to you because, you as Kathy Bear had said as well, like you just spoke so well about that imposter syndrome. And then towards the end, when you got so many people messaging you saying, thank you for your words. I've had that once in a while as well on an article or two that I was lucky enough to be in. But it's hard because like the algorithms are set against us, the unconscious bias, conscious bias in some cases, just the outright hate and racism. So I loved your book from start to finish. I pray that my daughter will read it. And I see Susan nodding along. So maybe even before I try to turn it over to you, Jesse, Susan, do you want to give it a go and just unmute yourself? I have to.
She typed in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. At least I see her nodding along, so her internet is good. I don't know how to call in, but I can hear you all. Love the visit to Spirit River. I was just up in northern Saskatchewan at Montreal Lake at Cousins Fishing Camp. Such a wonderful connection to land and family. As a ward of the state, then adopted to a white family, I left when I graduated grade 12. It took 40 years to reconnect, fighting social workers, government, before my birth mother and I reunited. Since then, my Métis family are my foundation. Fortunately, as a child, I went to powwows, talked to elders. I knew I was Métis since the age of 6. Thank you for speaking to our indigeneity and our own spirit inherent. It's beautiful, Wendy. Thank you. Or Susan, for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Susan, for that. That's just lovely. And thank you, Michelle, for that really powerful and very, that gets me, so thank you very much for those kind words. I hope my daughter reads it too, and my son reads it too. They haven't. They have, they're teenagers. They have no interest. But because I wrote it for them, when in terms of because you're often asked as an artist, and I remember the times when I used to be the person asking artists, it's like, who's your audience? And in terms of who I was thinking about, it was my kids. Because at the time that I was writing the book, there was a lot going on. Like this was late 2017, 2018 when I started to do it. I'd been offered to write a book many times and had never thought I had anything to say that was worthy of a book. And then really one of the things with the Appropriation Prize is that sort of said, I think maybe I do have something to say and maybe I can do it this way. It was also, to be honest, the time was difficult. The last it's gotten much better, I would say, in the last little bit. But there's been some challenges, and at the time I was getting a lot of death threats, and I was not very healthy, as one tends to be when you get a lot of death threats. And there was to be honest, there was in my mind that I may not live long enough to actually have these conversations with my children. And so, and I wanted them to know as best as I could why I did some of the things I did and why because one of the things when you make the choices I have made professionally and whatever is like, and my kids feel this a bit now, which is like your family catches a bit of the shrapnel in terms of the blowback. And so, as I've said to them, like, and I don't use their names a lot on social media or anything like that. And it's just to protect them a little bit because they have the last name, which they're sort of, as I said, once you're 18, if you want to get rid of it, you're certainly welcome to. But, for the moment, they have to live with it. And for better or worse, yeah, I figured if I wasn't going to get to an age where I could have these conversations, I wanted them to understand who their father was and who he was trying, why he did the things he did, and why he would either put himself in danger or make himself unhealthy in a way that meant that would sort of go away. Luckily, over the years, I've come to learn that, like, most people who threaten your life, the 99.9% of them not going to do anything. So you can sort of live, as I've, hey, I've even met Salman Rushdie, so I know that this is possible, that it doesn't happen. So I feel much safer these days, but at the time that was certainly part of the impetus. So I hope they read it. It's, again, wasn't writing it for a teenage audience at all, but was writing it for two teenagers, in terms of it might be something that would, they might, although it's interesting, they get a little more exposure these days to what their dad does, because they've been to a couple events where they've seen me speak. My daughter is actually traveling with me this week to the Sunshine Coast to a authors festival there. It's her first time. It's going to be a first time for a lot of things for her. First time in BC out west. First time doing that. I think she's mostly excited to first time business class, but that's teenage.
By the way, Jesse, that's one of my favorite places on earth. Before I experienced racism in the healthcare system, my husband and I used to waste all our money going scuba diving on the West Coast. And I was a Sea Cadet. And at that time, before Jean Chrétien cuts, they would just ship this little girl from Sylvan Lake out to the West Coast so I could go swim around in the ocean. It's one of my favorite places on earth. So hats off to you guys. I'm happy for you.
I'm looking forward to it. I've never been to this particular part of the coast. I've been, all over the place, but not. So I'm certainly interested. I wish we weren't doing quite as quick, because I scheduled it like I do my business trip. So it's like fly in, do the thing, fly out. So we don't get to spend as much leisure time as I would perhaps want, but it'll be, she wants to be an artist herself. That she is an artist, so she wants to be a professional artist, whatever that means, says the chair of the Canada Council for the Arts. But wants to be a professional artist, and so I do also want her to see a little bit this is it. This is you fly into a place, you do the show, you fly out. That's a lot of what this can be for a lot of artists. In my particular practice, public speaking, that is what you do. You fly in, you fly back, and you do a bunch of dates a year. So she'll get a bit of a taste. And in another way, my next book is a children's book, and she does a lot of illustrating and painting. So I'm trying to get her to have some window onto that, so she can learn how that actually works. I will also be learning how it works, having never done it myself, but maybe she can see with me as we go through the process of getting the illustrator and doing all of that bit. That's
amazing. I'm so happy to hear that. I kind of get a little frustrated with my daughter. She's 15, and I do understand what you're saying though about high profile. A lot of people ask about my girl, and it's embarrassing, right? I'm the front of the stupid Calgary Pride right now, and I even told them, are you sure you want someone straight and cis being the face? And they're like, no, it's fine, we want the allies, whatever. And I'm like, okay. So, but anyway, we already talked. My girl's probably not going to march with me, and I don't blame her. Who wants to march with their mom, especially straight cis mom? Right? So I get it. I get that, how hard it is on our kids. But, I had a guest not too long ago tell me, there's under 1 million of us registered anymore as Indigenous people. So our voices are getting a lot smaller. Obviously, UNDRIP and our inherent rights need to be pushed harder and further. But I mean, it's been over a year with my daughter trying to get her status under S3 too. So it's, it's ongoing, and I feel that with you. But I'm really happy to see that you're going to be doing a second book, and it's a kid's book. And one of the questions is, when will it be released?
Oh, I have no idea. It's the book, the process of, so this is all relatively new to me in terms of how this works. I've spent my entire career in broadcasting in the movie business, which is very, very different than the book business. So hey, I guess, and I'm probably not even supposed to tell you that there's a kid's I'm sure my agent would be like, you shouldn't go to book clubs and tell them that, because that's not a thing. We release news, they do the thing when they announce it or whatever. But I guess what I would say is, like, I've written the first draft, and that's in with the publisher. There will be multiple drafts because I already have ideas how I want to change it. And then we have to go through the whole thing of finding an illustrator and doing all of that. I've never written a kid's book before, so I wrote it the way I would think you write a kid's book. I don't know if that's the right way to do it, but they took it. So I don't know, like Unreconciled took 4 years to write. The bonus around this is it took me a weekend to actually just write the actual book. So that's looking up in terms of a timeline. But we're probably still talking like minimum a year is probably about right, because even from the time you're done with the editing, so I'm trying to think for Unreconciled, it was 6 months between the time of like the book being finished and into Penguin and it being in stores. So like we finished it in early wherever it would have been 2021, I guess, like very early January, and it didn't come out till September. So like that's the sort of lead time you're talking about. And then like we'd already approved the cover, like all of that had already happened. So it still takes that lead time when you've approved everything that needs to be approved. So the kids book will be a new adventure, but I would think minimum a year. And then I won't say anything more other than there are hints to what it is in the grown-up book. So if you've read Unreconciled, the children's book won't come as a big surprise, although it may, because it's not the story most people think it will be. But yeah, that's
awesome.
And I had a blast. I hope to come, they don't do book tours for kids books, which is unfortunate, but this book was so hard to write. So hard. Like the family stuff, was really difficult. I have never written about myself. I hope to do it very sparingly in the future, because it's really hard. It's been much easier in my experience as someone who's written millions of words professionally. Way harder when they're about you than virtually any other subject is easier than yourself. So I found writing the kids book, and because it involves pictures, and I am very I come from movie land, so everything I understand sort of goes through a movie editing process in my brain. In a lot of ways, that actually made more sense to me than the Unreconciled. Like the biggest struggle with Unreconciled was tone, structure, like getting the spine of it, because I had, if you all read the first draft, which you never will, thank God, but if you all did read it, like it's all there, like all the book is mostly there. Some of the stories that have happened afterwards aren't there, but mostly the book is there. But it's way too academic and like in my own head. It's not like, for a guy who on the radio, it's like, you were on the radio with this verbiage? Like no one would have believed it. And the structure, like I didn't know how to, I wanted to tell it sort of chronologically, but I wanted to do it the way the book ended up, which is like the opening of the chapter is like a chronological part of my life. By the time you're at the end of the chapter, we're talking about something that informs. And so that was always the idea. But boy, it took me a long time to wrestle that into a thing, thanks to my editor and everyone helping it. The kids book, as I said, a weekend. I wrote all the descriptions of what was on the pages, like what's happening for the illustrator, all the dialogue. Easy peasy, because it played like a movie in my brain. And it's much easier because, as you can tell, Unreconciled ain't ever going to be a movie, and for very good reasons. And that's it. Now I've taken up too much time. But
No, you've never. No, I wanted to show
thank
you
you so much.
something. No, look
Oh,
at all
no.
my dog ears. Like,
Good for
it's
you.
almost like every second page is dog-eared. And there's some that I say
Oh.
like, oh, I lost 10 pounds reading this. And the reason for it is because it just, when I know other people experience it, it just feels like, oh, what a relief. Thank God I don't have to explain it. I'll just say on page 70 of his book, read it. So yeah, I did that throughout here, actually. I talked about that and I underlined lots of different places as well. And then I added, well, we haven't technically put out a book or an episode since this that has included it, but I said right in my podcast script now, I'm going to include, and if you want to understand, read Jesse Wente's book Unreconciled from pages said whatever 180 to whatever, all of chapter 13 at one point or something. So yeah, I wanted you to know, and there was something that I did actually save here, and it was about on page 70 where you talked about supposedly with our status card we're supposed to get like a discount on tax.
Yeah.
I wanted you to know I actually have never heard of that ever until I went out to Ottawa. And then when they went out to Ottawa, it was the last day, people were like, did you know you can use your status card and not get taxed? I'm like, what? So I was super excited about it. So I used it like once when I was in Ottawa, but I've tried to push it here a few times, like in Lethbridge, nobody heard about it. I just read a status of a friend of mine that tried to go up to the Walmart here in East Hills and went in one ear out the other. Like, that is just not a thing across Canada. I mean, we talk about economic reconciliation and it's like the bare freaking minimum. They still can't do it in across all these real retail places, and and especially like the big ones, the Sobeys, the Walmarts, the Safeways, the Canadian Tires. Like, Canadian Tire is supposed to be standard policy, and yet the only person I've heard be able to get it in Calgary is actually at the West Canadian Tire, and I think you have to hit the right person at the right time in order to get it. So I wish people understood how embarrassing it is, and how, because you really articulated it well, how embarrassing and awful it is to even try to exert your rights. And it just feels like every little thing to exert your rights is an uphill battle. There's nothing in this book that I was like, it was just a relief to know other people experience it too, because I wasn't taken away from my mom. I didn't have a 60 scoop experience. I had a justice experience when my white father and my Satu Dene mom divorced. And of course, everything went into my dad's favor. So I was, raised in a white society, et cetera, et cetera. But that disconnect was there. It was such a shift too when I was a teen. And my poor auntie, she still reminds me of that.
So there was a question about, are we Canadian?
Yeah.
Not really.
No.
I mean, I think we have been given Canadian citizenship. And that was sometimes fraught, because in the olden days, sometimes if you wanted to be a citizen, you had to give up your rights in order to be a citizen. So like I wouldn't, I probably would say, like, I don't think I'm Canadian. I think I'm Anishinaabe, and that's sort of it. I do have a Canadian passport, but it's so interesting you mentioned the status card. I mean, I think for many of us, I know I do, I have a very fraught relationship with it, in that I think it's BS, like, as a thing, and yet it was so important to me as like a kid to have it, because it was like,
I'm Indian.
Yeah, this exactly.
Yep.
Well, because I was already being called an Indian all the time, like that, like, so this was like at least a card that went, well, maybe it's special then to be, in the way you would think in a very, like, a kid sort of mind. And at the time I got it, I remember all my cousins the whole thing was the tax. But now they've made it more complex, because there's that federal one that comes with the stamping, and like the one I have is the one they give you on the res, which they just like laminate, like right, because last time I got it, I tell the story, like I just walked in the office and they're like, hey Jesse, we'll just print you off, and so like that one they won't take, and they've turned me down in some stores, although to be honest, I don't do it that often because it's like a hassle. I do it, like last time I bought a car, I did it because like that's a real tangible savings. And I think a lot of Canadians misunderstand that, and it's also at the root of why they think like we don't have to pay taxes and all these other things. And of course, the misunderstanding is the reason we have this is a treaty. So the reason you get to be here is part of it is this reciprocal, bare minimum reciprocal thing. But it's also because, well, under the reserve system, we don't own the land. So how, like literally the entire economic system in Canada is about land ownership. Like that's why the richest people on the planet own land, because that's what it's all about. Well, if you live on reserve, guess what? You don't own the land. So you can't get a loan, you can't participate in the economy. Like I was just explaining this to my son, who was talking about economic, not reconciliation, talking about economic equality. Yeah, very good book. And I said, okay, I hear you, but have you thought of the fact that, you to this day, that's true, that you can't get a loan on reserve land. But even beyond that, until like, I think it was the 50s, we weren't allowed to hire lawyers. Until the 60s, we weren't allowed to vote in federal elections. Until the 50s, we weren't allowed to gather in groups larger than 7. Like we had so many of these laws that restricted any participation in everything else that Canadians got to do to build up their wealth. And so I was explaining to my son, so imagine you have all those laws, and then you sort of lift them, and you think, do you think that is equality if you just lift them? And of course, it's very, even he can go, well, no, because if you haven't had that, it's that metaphor of the race. Well, if Canada started the race 150 years ago, but we're chained at the finish line for the first 100 years, when do we catch up? Unless you have massive sort of shift. And the one thing I do say repeatedly, because this is how I've come to frame it for politicians and whatnot, is because I think there is a fear, right, in so much of what we're asking for in terms of returning things to us, that it will be deprivation for those who feel they have to return it. And the point I've landed on is like, look, there was an entire industrial complex built on taking this stuff away from us. Like people had whole careers to take stuff away from us. People literally have legacy cottages that are passed down to their families because they were so good at taking away things from our communities. They got promoted. They became, they had all of this intergenerational wealth created by depriving us of all of these things. Can we not actually recognize that we could also create an industrial complex to give it all back? That just like we built all these schools and invested to take it away, we could build schools to give it back. Like, you took the language away, you could invest in giving it back. It's not like, and not just could you should invest in giving it all back. And guess what? Maybe our communities will get cottages or stuff because we work in the giving back part of it. That, like, if we want to talk about reconciliation, that to me is sort of it, right? Like, it's like, turn all the wealth and all the effort that you took to take these things away and turn it all back to giving it back to us. Let us take it back and empower us to do that. And not think about it as this deprivation. Think about it, it's the same way we should be thinking about the climate crisis, which is not, sadly, and I know I'm speaking to folks in Alberta, but it's not that like, well, we have to lose this thing, so it's like doom. No, we have to lose this thing so we can do another thing. We just have to pivot in order for us to do anything on an ongoing basis, we need to do this particular pivot. People will still get rich. If that's what everyone's worried about, people will still get rich. Like, this system has a way of ensuring that. So we can just pivot. And I think it's been interesting to watch on social media, a lot of people reminding me of the big environmental thing of my youth, which was like the CFC ban, which was like, people forget because we have no memories anymore. That was a huge deal that like we banned CFCs globally. Like everyone agreed we would do it. And it worked. Like that actually was the last big successful global environmental push. Why can't, like, we can do that. We still put hairspray, like we still have all that shit that had CFCs in it. we have it all. Like I put the band spray on my pan tonight. Like we got it all. We just shifted and people still got rich. Those companies still exist. They just do their business differently. I don't know why we don't have, well, I do know why, but it would be great if we could actually just reframe, as my therapist always says, reframe these conversations, because we are too trapped thinking that this is the only way out, and we just no, we can pivot and do it different. Canada would be just as wealthy giving it all back. That's the trick for Canada to
I am
understand.
so with you. And you talked about Alberta, you're talking to Alberta. Here's the thing. There is this white saviorism in Alberta, even in the so-called left progressive movements, that will not allow Indigenous voices at the table. It drives me mental. If it wasn't for folks like, I don't know, Clayton in the States, talking about Indigenous, like UNDRIP and land back. And so back to your point, Cynthia, like the Crown land is like 90% of the land. It's ridiculous. Like
Oh, Crown land isn't real. That's not a real thing.
No.
That's what they call the stolen part. It's not a real, that doesn't exist. I don't know. That's just what they call it. I'll tell you what my cousins do on Crown land. They just hunt and do every goddamn thing that they've been doing for centuries on that land. And my cousin Junior always say that the fish and game, like, what are you gonna do? Like, come, I dare you to fight us. And they never do. He's like, I'm gonna shoot the moose in front of you on the land I'm not supposed to be on. What are you gonna do about it? And Junior's right. Like, what are they? Because they don't do anything ever about it, because they know Crown land, like, that's not a real thing. That's not we should stop pretending that that's a real thing that exists in any way. Like, just use the two words together and think, like, how is that a real thing? Yeah, so we shouldn't even land back. Is it happening in the US? I mean, I think we see some of it. It was interesting, the community, Elliott Lake here in Ontario near my community, just gave Ganabajing, my community, back, it was 14 acres or something. Actually gave the land back to them in terms of they have control over it again. So it is happening. And I think that's one of the big tricks that we have to overcome. It's maybe the biggest trick with colonialism, is it sort of disguises what it's sort of, that it turned community into competition, which is maybe its biggest evil thing it's done, is it totally erodes any idea of what community is, and instead refocuses around capital, which is just a disaster, as we are seeing in the pandemic. But it disguises, it makes you think that it makes you always think in a zero-sum game, that there's always profit and loss, that is just the reality. So if someone's going to profit, someone has to lose. Not a real thing either. It's because again, from natural systems, we know it's circles, not one way or the other. And so that's the thing. Like, land back makes everyone nervous, but of course, land back would actually help everyone. Like, that's the rub. Us getting us culture back would actually help.
Yeah.
It would help everyone, not just us. It would help literally everyone if that's what happened. If we got land stewardship of the land back, it would help everyone. If we got our sovereignty back, it would help everyone. These are not threats. They're only threats if we think that we have to maintain this thing, this fiction, this thing. And again, to go back to, and I'll end with the thing I said sort of early at the beginning. I know Kathy has a comment, but whenever I think about those sort of systems change, I think of the mountain. I go right back to sitting in Banff, staring at that sacred mountain, thinking, that mountain laughs at us. And what word? Like, think of all the mountains have seen, or all the big trees have seen in their life, and how they must consider us and what we're concerned about, and just go, what are you doing? Like, come on, get it together. Like, because the mountain is laughing at us. They're like, this is nothing you've built is permanent, like me. And like, why can't we discuss those things? And so let's think about it that way. Like when we confront systems and we don't think they're changeable, ask yourselves, is it a mountain? Because like, if it's not a mountain, if it's a even if it's a man-made mountain, movable. It's only the big, those suckers you can't, yeah, no moving those. And also humble ourselves. That's the other thing colonialism needs to happen, is humble ourselves to nature and understand that the reconciliation we have as people is but one part of it. The reconciliation with the land is way, way bigger. It will help if we reconcile with ourselves to get to that part, but also understand that Mother Nature is undefeated. She's won every fight anyone has ever picked with her, ever in all of history. She never loses. It's guaranteed. So we need to humble ourselves and realize there is no chance we win this. Like, we are waging war against someone who cannot be beaten. They are, number one, they're our kin. We should be treating them like family. And number two, we cannot win this one. That is why, at least from an Anishinaabe perspective, we humble ourselves, because who are we kidding? It is not even a close fight. You can't do it. In our tradition, you don't dig unless under very serious consideration. You're not supposed to dig more than 2 feet under the ground because the wound is so deep. And if your wound are that bad, what happens? You don't know. So the whole point is you don't do that. And if you do it, you really need to think about it. Like, it would take a lot of consideration to dig that deep. We also need to do that, humble ourselves. And Canada's a wonderful place where we should be humble. Like, the Canada Council just took the entire board up north to Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk and Yellowknife and all these places. Because I realized, of course, that many of them had never been that north. Almost all, I would say all of them, had never been in an Indigenous community, except for me, of course. And, you want to go humble someone, go to Tuk, go stand at the edge of the ocean and look out and realize you got nothing. Yeah, you are, the beauty is that we're here in humanity, and that this is the gift. That we need to humble ourselves in the face of that. And hopefully the board, I think they were humble, because it's hard when you stand on that land not to go, holy crap, like this is by the way, if you ever get a chance to drive the Arctic Highway from Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk, which I got to do this year, take this opportunity. It's talking about being humbled. You will be humbled by that place. And as someone who's worked in the Canadian culture sector their whole life and has always been curious about why Canada is so confused about its own cultural heritage, when I would say the answer has always been out their windows. If you ask what the First Nations culture was, it was the land. It's where we lived. And that's the defining feature of this place, is all of the beauty of it outside. Just open the window, look outside, you're there. Kathy, I want to give you time to say the comment, and then I should let everyone go, because it's getting late here.
Jesse,
oh no, where'd Kathy go?
You've been so given. You, during the COVID, went to my podcast, and now you've come to this book club. I can't thank you enough for how giving you've been. Kathy, go ahead.
I just forgot to talk about Avatar, because I hated that movie too. It was just so violent and so blatant, right? Come on, like, just kill all the First Nations people. I couldn't even watch it. And then of course the woman has to fall in love with somebody that's not of her own race. Like, that was just like the topping of it. It was like I stopped it at that time. But I'm just wondering,
like Dances with Wolves, where like it happens to be the one white woman in the tribe, who, by the way, is the only one who doesn't have a comb. I've always bugged me about that movie. Like, everyone else perfectly groomed. Somehow she's all over the place. And they happen to find each other. Such made up. Avatar, the thing, because I've had people challenge me about my read of the film, which I think is ridiculous. But like, I would point out, look at the casting. Because he actually cast Indigenous and Black people in all the blue roles. So like, he knew damn well what he was doing. Like, give me a break. Like, yeah, and I can't believe we're gonna have think it's 2 or 3 more of those movies, and I can't. I there are a few things I can think of I wanted to see less than that. Like I can't. I just watched with the kids. We watched the new Predator movie, which is called Prey,
Yeah.
which is a lot of blood. Warning for those that get squeamish. But I thought it was pretty interesting. I have always liked it. It's basically a remake of the original film, but set not quite pre-contact. Contact has happened, but we're still early. I would say it's mostly French fur traders. I thought it was an interesting take on the, and I like Predator. I mean,
Yeah.
that movie came out when I was a teenager, so of course I like it. So yeah, I thought that was good. Avatar, I have zero interest in Avatar. I am sure it will make a boatload of money and become a theme park and whatever. But it doesn't hold a lot of interest in me. And tomorrow night, for those that have, I can't remember what channel it's on, FX or something in Canada, but Rutherford Falls second season starts. If you like comedy, and this one's got a whole bunch of folks from up more north of the Medicine Line are in it this year. Like the cast is, because we have Michael now, but now there's like a whole bunch, Tio and a bunch of other people are now in it. I quite like that show. Very goes down easy. I think Reservation Dogs second season is out, and there's big stuff coming here. There's Little Bird, which is a big series shot in Winnipeg this past year. There's Bones of Crows, which was shot out west, coming out. So big. We'll have our own shows to indulge in very shortly, which is great news.
So I can say that we heard at first Jesse's feelings about Prey. So there was 2 things that we got out of this podcast that maybe I better shut up before I, get more out of you. But that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, is what you thought of Prey. And weirdly enough, my husband, his warehouse had the pawn scene in it. They built a whole pawn scene just to clean the weapons. Weird.
I thought it was pretty smart. Like I thought the callbacks, I don't want to spoil it for people, but like for most folks of my vintage, there was a lot of callbacks, very specific scenes that relate to the original film. That's like, what's why I call it a remake. That I thought were very smart. I don't expect a ton from these movies, and they mostly deliver not a ton. So I usually my expectations are met. This is one where I was like, oh, that's actually like someone smart actually wrote this and like did put this together, because I can't speak to the representation because I'm not from the nation. It seems good. It seems the community's happy with it. I know there's a Comanche version, which is very super cool, and I will watch that one for sure. And I think it's I think we'll see a lot more of that stuff. I think because it's actually mostly, to be honest, I think there's 2 things. It's a lot of our young filmmakers grew up watching that stuff as I did, and so their interests tend towards those sorts of movies. But also it's very much a simple market concern, which is horror movies are the easiest films to sell globally, because what scares people is far less culturally specific than, say, comedy, which tends to be really culturally specific, right? We don't think it is. And, physical comedy and stuff isn't. But like an Adam Sandler movie is going to work in America and might not work literally anywhere else in terms of its sense of humor. Whereas something terrifying, like Jaws, or some giant alien that's eating people, which is what this movie, like, that's scary. Like, you don't like it. That's that. So just from the way the movie business works, I think we'll see a lot of Indigenous horror movies, because we already were seeing that like Predator. People are saying, oh, it's actually not. It's actually sort of coming midstream. We've already had a bunch of Indigenous horror movies already, and I think we'll just be getting more. I think it also is because we have a lot of scary stories. I don't know if any of you have heard like Inuit scary stories, but they are the scariest things I have ever heard in my life. Well, just imagine what adults would tell children to make sure they were careful on the ice, and you can let your imagination go from there. Anishinaabe told stories about the woods, right? So everything's like, be careful of the woods because the Wendigo or whatever is gonna like eat you or whatever. Inuit, it's about what occurs under the ice, and holy, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Don't want to think about it. Nightmare time. Someone will eventually make that movie, and the world is not ready for that at all. Like that will creep everyone right out, because they, as it was explained to me by an Inuk, they said like, well, we spend a lot of time indoors, like during the winter. So we told story, like, and it's the same true with Anishinaabe, like winter is story time. Like you go inside, you tell stories, you make babies, you do, that sort of thing. And in the spring you come out. And she said, our season is just longer in terms of that. And so you want to get the heart pumping is how she would put it. So a lot of sex and a lot of scary stuff. And, I hope to see all of those movies, both sides of that coin, coming. So I think you will see a lot of that stuff. And I think it would also be interesting, and has proven interesting, because Avatar, like, whatever. But like when you have someone like Taika Waititi, and I don't love all of his movies, but it's interesting when we actually get those chances to make those big budget, because I think his movies actually do read different than, say, James Cameron's do. And it's precisely because he comes at it from a very different perspective. And I'm very much looking forward. He's doing Star Wars. And Star Wars is a series that has needed an Indigenous director since its conception. Like the 77 movie, I mean, all my love to George, but if one of us could have directed it, it might have been better. Like, because this is a theme that, as I say in the book, like, it's quite obvious why we connect with this material. You have a technologically driven empire out to wipe out folks who are interconnected in community and feel that there's an interrelated force that connects all living creatures together. Yeah. I mean, it becomes quite obvious why we might identify with a certain group in this movie versus, it's interesting how Americans view themselves, though, because they don't quite understand what
There's a
side
bad guy.
all on. Yeah, they don't, most don't. They don't realize that, yeah, that's why you do the heraldry with the parading. You might want to clue in that that's what the film is sort of telling you on that one. And like what I love about the new Star Wars, and I'm going on a bit of a Star Wars rant, so I apologize at the end here, but I do like that the series that we're seeing, because I have to say the movies, they're not for me anymore. I've accepted that they're not for me, so I'm not invested like a lot of the other fans are in like making them for me, because they were for me when I was 3 and saw it in the theater. They're still for kids who are 3, right? So like adults getting overly upset about them is we need to be chill and like accept that they never made sense. So it's okay if they still don't make sense, because what are you talking about? And so like, again, it didn't make sense for me as a kid the moment Darth Vader's mask came off and it wasn't James Earl Jones. Like, that's the moment I call BS on that whole thing. I was like, couldn't it have just been James Earl Jones? Like, how is that a stretch that James Earl Jones would have a white son versus a thing called Jabba the Hutt? Like, I think we could have jumped that bridge in the early 80s. And frankly, if we had done that, I often think about that, that would have erased so much racism we find in the Star Wars fandom now, if it had been James Earl Jones, because all those people would have to shut up. Like they would have to accept that was canon. Like I wish he had done that. It would have been so awesome to just have like, comes off and it's James Earl Jones is underneath it. Anyway, I digress. The new ones I like because they're very obviously Westerns, but they are Westerns told from our side of the things. So like the Mandalorian, well, from my reading of the story, you've got a child that was scooped and you've got a warrior attempting to return the child to his family. So that reads as a whole Indigenous thing to me. If you watch Boba Fett, it's played by a literal Indigenous, like Boba Fett's literally made one of the most famous Indigenous actors ever plays the character. And again, he's trying to forge community in a bizarre colonial outpost on this, like, what is like, I love it because it is finally, to me, a return to sort of the roots of Star Wars, which was always a Western, because, you know, Western / samurai movie is what was Lucas's influence in it. And these movies feel like samurai Westerns in the sort of the best way possible. And from our, because I think Star Wars is sort of told from our perspective, right? Like we are meant to be the heroes in that. And these ones return us to the heroes. There's what I found distressful about the sort of more recent ones, they make the villains too cool. And so, and which is a result of the fact that we all loved Darth Vader because he was super cool. Like, it was impressive, even though we knew that, like, he's the big bad Indian agent. There's something, like, I don't know, there's something, the black cape and they're, you know, very alluring. So it was one of those series where, like, the villain was the actual star of the whole show, and that confused them in the more recent show. But now we're back to the point of, like, no, it's like communities scrappily trying to defend themselves against an advancing colonial rule. And yes, I can't wait for our folks to actually get the tools to direct these things, because I think they'll be even more pointed and, like, even more direct than these ones are, which I think are pretty direct. Like, I haven't been following what the fan bros say about them because I just don't care. But when I watch them, I'm like, this is, again, I'm sort of amazed that they're made by Disney, like the most colonial of companies. I've never had the chance to ask Taika, like, do they know? Like, do they, when they get the scripts, do they read them and go, oh, this makes sense?
Hold
or
up.
not?
Hold
Yeah.
up. How often do you talk to him?
Who, Taika?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's happened. I you know, I don't want to give away too many.
Holy.
I've been in the movie business, Michelle, a very long time. You accumulate. So, you know, when I met Taika, he was making shorts. Like, it was a million years ago, and he was an up and coming filmmaker, and we showed his shorts in Imaginative. And, you know, the folks that make Reservation Dogs, I knew all those folks from years ago. The reality is, any one of, like, it's not a big community. So if there's Indigenous folks making movies at this point, I've probably met them at the point. But yeah, I've never had the chance to ask them, like, when the Thor Ragnarok script, like, when they get it, do they understand? Like, did they get, like, because it's a big anti-colonial movie where, like, literally the movie ends by the colonialists realizing they have to destroy the colony in order to fix the world. Like, that's literally what happens at the end of it. They go, oh no, we actually have to destroy everything we've ever worked for in order to save everything. Do they, like, does Disney understand that that's what the movie is about? I know in the past with other movies that I love that are big commercial movies, like Alien, for example, like, the studio did not know what Alien was about. Like, they got it as, like, the surface story, but if you listen to all the interviews with the director and like, they knew what they were doing, but they never let in the studio in terms of what they were doing. I would just be interested, does, like, Disney know? Like, when the new scripts for Mandalorian come in, do they know? Like, I don't even know if there's Indigenous people on the writing staff, but it reads like almost there would have to be. I don't know. It's a very interesting, and given my knowledge of Disney, which sadly, because I've been in the movie business, is quite deep, and they're not, like, the greatest company. They're quite predatory. Like, they really are very colonial in their approach. Yeah, I just find it, like, just to give people an idea, like, they try to copyright the story of Moana, which is, like, you can't, you know, that's not a thing that you can do. So like they do that like all the time. It's very weird. Not weird, it's very colonial.
Very culturally appropriating too.
Yeah, and like they control, like they do weird stuff all the time, and they're but I would just be fascinated to know if they know, like if they understood that, like they're funding a $250 million anti-capitalist, anti-colonial film that literally is going to, the most bizarre of ironies, make $1 billion, and is directed by like a Maori guy who's like is all of those things. If you ever talk to him, I don't know. I'd be curious. We'll never know, I don't think, until maybe he writes a book or someone writes a book. But I don't know. And I will say, for those Star Wars fans, just to conclude, because this has gone on way too long. But I did have a meeting. The last big meeting I ever had with Lucasfilm was just as the sale to Disney. It wasn't public yet, but it was happening. And I had this dinner with this, I don't want to give his name because he doesn't, whatever, a top executive at Lucasfilm. And we were just talking about all, Star Wars, and he had come up because we're doing a show in the theater, and lovely guy. And he just turned to me and he said, Jesse, what this deal means. I said, what? He said, there will always be Star Wars now. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, they're going to make Star Wars forever now. He's like, they will never stop. It will go on for all of time. He's like, they're going to make, and I was like, really? That seems, and turns out that dude knew exactly what he was talking about, because they have made so much Star Wars. They're going to make so much more of it. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but it's going to happen. And I find that fascinating as someone who grew up watching the first 3 movies in theaters. And literally, if you'd asked me then, I would have thought we'll never see it again in our lives. And now my kids will never know a time when there hasn't been Star Wars. And that's a interesting trip. But yeah, I enjoy it. We watch all the we watched Obi-Wan. I even liked. I mean, yeah, it doesn't give up. None of it's going to make sense. So give up on that dream, and just let it wash over you in whatever way sort of works. And I thought it went well, much better than the Marvel. I don't like the Marvel stuff at all anymore. On that one, and I'll leave. God, I'm talking way too much, Michelle. This is a disaster. But
I won't shut you up, because I know where you're at. It's like a 10:15. So
yeah.
Late. So thank you. And normally what we do is just let you talk until you're done. And you are you just like to speak, and you're such a good dynamic speaker, and we're all here to listen to you. You have all these folks that are just here excited to hear every word you're saying. So
and I mean,
I'm not cutting you off.
It's
not
so
when we're talking about
because
intergalactic colonialism. Like, there's nothing better in the world than intergalactic colonialism. And I have told the liberals, especially, because they're all Star Wars fans too. I've said, but you realize you're the dark side. You're the new world order. I am the indigenous person. I'm the woman.
They haven't again grasped that. I would ask them to watch any ceremony where like grand music is played and people walk up, like you can quickly tell which side you're on. But I just wanted to quickly say, on the Marvel universe, what I find fascinating, because I had such hope in it early, before it was called when it was just like, we're going to make some superhero movies. Because like, if you're a kid of my vintage, you always dreamed that they would make superhero movies. It was like, why can't we have a cool Batman or whatever? And I find it fascinating that they have recreated the exact issue with comic books, which is, if you don't start at number 1, you're lost. Like, you get like and I say this, I'm looking at my stack of comic books. I'm a devoted comic book collector. I've been reading comic books since I was a child, when they cost like 15 cents or whatever. I love them, but they are impenetrable if you aren't a fan from the moment of one. It's the worst aspect of the whole thing, because if you want to read, take your pick, Spider-Man, but it's issue 138, I don't know what to tell you. Like, you've literally, like, Mary Jane is probably dead already by the time you've got, I don't know what's happened. And that's what they've done with the movies. Like, I feel like I can't enter the universe, whereas the Star Wars feels like you can just sort of go in, and they're self-contained shows that it helps. Like, my enjoyment of them is deepened because I'm a nerd about Star Wars. But my wife can watch them, and she's so not a nerd about Star Wars, and she loves them. She like, oh, this is it's good storytelling. She gets, whenever a monster eats someone, she gets scared. But other than that, she's really into it.
I'm just going to add to your point, though. So my daughter doesn't care about Star Wars at all, and I feel like I failed as a parent. So Mandalorian came to be, and we were talking about, like, all of this backstory stuff. She felt like for the first time in her life, she felt invested enough to go through the movies, because again, like you said, Mandalorian was said from an Indigenous point of view. So it was the first time she connected with Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see that. I mean, my kids had no choice. Like, there's no capacity for you to live in our house and not see Star Wars. Like, it's just not. It's just not possible. The movies, they had to see it. It was, and they like, what's I've found gratifying is they're fans, and I get to be a fan sort of like I was earlier in life through them. And because one of the challenges when you're a film critic is, especially if you're a film critic who comes from a place of love, which I did, which is like, I loved movies. If I was to be honest with anyone else who loved movies, I would probably advise against becoming a film critic, or working in the industry, because it's a great way to fall out of love with the thing that got you in the first place. So, like, because when I was a film critic, and I was one for about 20 years, like, through that stretch between programming film festivals and the film criticism job, I was watching about 1,500 movies a year. So when you watch 1,500 movies a year, you watch mostly bad movies, because that's just the reality of 1,500 movies. And that grinds you down a bit. And then I would say the other big grind is I switched, like, because for me, and I described this in the book, like, criticism was great. It meant I was doing something I was passionate about, but I was unsatisfied in that, like, as a critic, you only get to review the movies that get made. You don't really have a lot to say about what gets made. You just have to live with it and review it. And I wasn't thrilled with the movies. Like, after a while, you go, there could be better movies. Like, we don't have to have these bad ones. And so I became a programmer, because as a curator, then you're starting to choose which movies, you get to select which ones sort of have a life. And now I eventually ended up starting a funding agency where literally you're giving money before the movie ever gets made to help determine those things. And I think that, like, I gained back some of my love. At the same time, I will admit I'm a bit tired in terms of the sector. I could use a break, and I won't say more about that, but it's an industry. It's a long stretch I've had in the industry, and hopefully I've left it better than when I entered it. I guess or I will leave it. I should say, not I haven't left it yet, but when I do leave it, I hope it'll be a little bit better. But it when you get to know, it's like with anything, right? Like, what's that old saying about the sausage factory? Like, when you see how the sausage is made, maybe you don't want to eat it. It's the same with the movie business, right? If you've seen, you get to see too much, and you start to, and you know too many people, and it becomes hard to watch the movies for what they are, because, like, you're watching it going, yeah, but that guy is such a jerk, and this person that. Oh, and do I remember this whole disaster that occurred on the set? And oh, look, they just cut that scene out as if that person never, like, it becomes too labored. And so I hope in my life I will regain at some point some of the distance that allowed the love to be sort of more freely there. Because I still love movies. I'm just not sure I'm in love with them at the moment in the same way that I used to be. And if you could see my room, you're sitting in a room with a giant home theater set up and 4,000 DVDs on the wall. It's clearly a room by someone who's desperately in love with movies, but I don't, the state of the current industry gives me a lot of pause, I guess is what I would say. And I do, one of my hopes is that by injecting our folks more fully into it, that will actually bring about some of the change I'm looking for. That's always been the hope. Don't know if that will necessarily, but I think, I think our folks are producing very interesting work. And so there's a chance. And plus, I think that will also hopefully bring about a cultural change in the sector, which is also desperately needed, because way too many people are harmed and just don't need to be. And that's true of literally all of life. And we just need to understand that it doesn't, movies is a particular challenge, or it's not a particular challenge, but one of the reasons why is that so many of the heroes of movies were not nice people. They didn't create a good culture. And I say this as someone who's studied them and loved them and whatever. Like Hitchcock was not a nice person. Stanley Kubrick, maybe the director I've been the most close to I didn't actually know him, but in terms of my, I don't say he wasn't nice. Complex is maybe how I would generously describe Stanley.
But your love for him really came out in this book, and I wanted you to know that was something else that I really appreciated from you too, because I have the whole Stanley Kubrick collection except for that last one with Tom Cruise. And
I quite like that one. That one's grown on me a lot, because I think Stanley, the casting of that movie sort of tells you the genius of Stanley. Like, the dude cast Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman in a movie about a couple's relationship collapsing. Like, the guy was a genius. He was just, he was also a guy who made his actors do 140 takes.
Yeah.
And when, that's not right. Like, if we're being honest, and I understand he's a precise artist and all of that, I got all the time in the world for that. 140 takes borders on cruelty, because you're trying to drive them nuts in order to get something specific out of them. You can't, like, what he did to Shelley Duvall on like The Shining, like, it's not good. Like, those aren't good behaviors, but we worship these people. And so as a result, a lot of folks who enter movie making think you have to be a jerk to get ahead. And the industry tolerates jerks. Like, this is what ended up really rubbing me, was that, because as a critic, you don't actually see a lot of that, right? You get invited in after the jerks have done their thing, and you're like, they're all very nice to you, because when you literally, as soon as you get into the actual movie business, because critics aren't actually in the business proper, then their jerks are just jerky to you, and it becomes, oh, that's how this is. Like, I've never had more people yell at me than at the time I was in the movie business, and for no reason. Like, you're yelling over movies, like grow up. But we also just tolerate it, because you've had this whole industry where the top people were jerks, so you tolerate. It's why Harvey Weinstein was able to be Harvey Weinstein. Everyone knew Harvey was a jerk. Like, I've met Harvey. I've attended festivals where he's been present. He was like, you did not need to know him to know he was a jerk. He behaved like a jerk in the shows. He would behave like a jerk. You knew he was and you didn't have to know all the backstory. You knew that the behavior you witnessed was inappropriate. Like, that shouldn't be tolerated in that way. Yet it was. It totally was. Like, he got sweets, and like the festivals all put him up. And I remember at the movie theater, eventually I passed an edict finally, because I was like broken by all of it. And I finally said, okay, enough. We're never yelling again. We never yell. We're in the movie business. No one is dying. If you're doing brain surgery, you can yell. If you're booking a movie theater, you don't get to yell. If anyone yells at you, meaning my staff, you immediately transfer them to me. So I will deal with the idiot yelling. And then we're going to pay on time. We're going to be super polite. We're just going to be nice and happy. And if people are going to be jerks, those are people we just say, sorry, we're not booking the film or whatever. And it improved my life. I hope it improved my staff lives. It meant that we didn't always get the movie, like the business sometimes pushed back on that. But it was my way of just saying, like, we don't have to, because I was yelling like that, because I was schooled, like, no, Jesse, you have to yell. Like, that's the only way it'll work. And I'd be yelling, going, I feel like an ass. Like, this isn't me. I don't want to be mean. I'm not that type of person. It's movies. I don't know why we aren't just having a love fest about movies. Like, this is silly. And yeah, so I also think that injecting us and folks that have been locked out of those sectors, bringing them in, is, yes, we want the stories to change, but we also want the culture to change, because I just don't see.
That's so great.
I've been in Indigenous theater companies and in other Indigenous, and you don't see the same behavior like that we see there. And so that is also very needed, that we just change that. And if you want to be a jerk and direct a movie, do it, go over there and do it over there. And this is a place where it's less jerky. And I honestly think the movies will be better. The story I always tell to young filmmakers, I just did it this week, was like Guillermo del Toro, who I know and am very good friends with. Like, Guillermo makes giant movies. He makes really good movies. And he's like one of the sweetest people you would ever meet in your life. That guy has never yelled at anything. Like, he's making Pinocchio. That's the type of guy Guillermo is. And he's so thrilled just with making movies. I have never been on set with him, was just watching a kid leading his best life.
That's what we need more of. But honestly,
I think you feel it in the films. His films feel like they come from love as opposed to something else. He makes movies that he doesn't care if they're commercially successful, even though they are, because he's just feeding his passion. And he's not a jerk on his sets. Taika's not a jerk on his sets. Like, there's tons of role models where you can make great movies and you don't have to be that. And we need to model those and hold those folks up, including, by the way, most of the women I've ever encountered in the film business are not the jerks. Sometimes they are, but typically not. So it's like, that would help. And it's one of the reasons why I love the Indigenous filmmaking community, because it's mostly women that do it. And it's a much more humane space in general, not all the time, but in general, it's much more humane, because women are really the people who started Indigenous cinema globally, both here in Canada and in New Zealand. And they're still very much the ones that keep it alive. So and I think that's why our sector, our portion of the sector, actually just is different and feels very different than the larger sector.
You know what, Jesse, you have been a trailblazer for Indigenous people, for Indigenous cinema. And even here, I am so humbled you'd be willing to come to my podcast one time, let alone come to this book club. And I hope you know, from the bottom of my heart, it just fills my heart that you would be willing to do this with us. So thank you for all your time today.
I'm so happy you tolerated my blathering. And I know that Shelly, I see Shelly's got a hand up. Shelly, did you want to ask something? And then I promise I'll shut up and I'll go let you go after evenings.
So hi Jesse and everyone. So I have a lot of tabs too. I think I'm almost done. I'm on page 151. But I come at it from a different ledge. I know I have privilege, but I am also a autistic mid-fat woman. So I come at it with a lot of intersectionality, in that language is a deep thing for me, a special interest. I do a lot of deep dives. The reason why this is so near and dear to my heart is because I can hide my disability, but I'm trying not to do that anymore because it really affects me health-wise. We're all kind of in it together. The nuances are different. And I until I found out I was autistic 2 years ago, I thought I wasn't disabled enough. Like I didn't, the identity piece. I know it's different. It's very different because the genocide in the government is very different. It comes back to capitalism and trying to make minorities fight within each other and fight against each other, than realizing the overarching systemic problem of capitalism and colonialism that makes people or makes everybody produce. That's the a product is like your worth is productivity, but instead of being your worth as a human and what you have to like your thoughts and just being a human being is enough to be offered. And what you and I've had some struggles, but I'm not going to go into it. But what you said, and Michelle was trying to talk to. I got it. Michelle was trying to, because I was taking things personally, and I got it. It's that I talk about a lot of ableist stuff, and people don't, if they don't even understand ableism or racism, they're not going to understand ableism. And I was taking it personally because I feel that I'm never doing enough. But I think I have to, give myself grace and say, I'm doing as much as I can with the body I have, and that I can only do it, and I have to give myself grace. And when people are talking, it's not always directed at me. And I think it's just because it's my own self enemy and my inner ableism that I'm not enough, because society doesn't make me thinking I'm not enough. And the imposter inner ableism that I've only found my true identity in 2020 of being autistic, and that's a whole unpacking of itself. But it makes so much sense because it's all interconnected. And thank you, Kimberly Crenshaw, for your intersectionality, because we're only going to make it if we do it all together. And the 7 generations, that makes so much sense to me, because why are we only thinking about here and now in the Indigenous teaching when we should be thinking the projects for 7 generations ahead? Because then that will be the environmentalism that we need. Because like, how is an open coal pit in the mountains going to help 7 generations ahead? It's not. And that's how I think bottom up. So I think a lot of the smaller pictures and trying to connect things. So I connected a lot of things of what you said in here with disability and intersectionality. And thank you for this book.
Oh, Shelley, well, thank you so much for that and for sharing. I really appreciate that. And I think disability is sort of maybe not quite, because, but it's, I think it's one of the last things in terms of the equity, or, we've struggled to give that equal time. And we're going through sort of an event right now with the pandemic where a lot more people are going to end up with sort of ongoing health challenges. And we probably sort of have to rethink the whole label or idea of disabled, quite frankly, sort of moving forward in terms of how we define it, because I don't think it's that great. And then for sure with my own work in therapy and everything, like the big thing, and you really nailed it, which I think is the most important thing, which is colonialism has messed with everyone, not just Indigenous people. So everyone is conditioned by colonialism, is suffering by it. Even those that benefit the most from it are actually still suffering from it. They just are somewhat blinded to it. So we all have to actually get our way out. And you touched on the main point, which is colonialism is about doing, and humanity is about being. And and colonialism and capitalism specifically, it only cares about the doing. So, and it only cares about people when they are doing, or when they're in the window of doing. So if you're of earning age, when you're monetizable under capitalism, that's when they care about you. Either other spectrum, child or adult, not so much. I don't know if someone's got a loud sound going.
Sorry. I was just going to add about
Yeah.
the disability in the film, how underrepresented people with disabilities are. Like Sia put out that music film, which was just trashed before it even got out, and she still put it out. It's just, we're very underrepresented as well.
Yeah, I think it's because you don't have it's one of those challenges where you don't maybe have that community as represented in the sort of storytelling infrastructure to actually tell that. I have seen some good ones. I saw a very fascinating, it was a film about a wrestler, but it was all in the deaf community, and the film operates as if the characters are deaf, so you don't hear everything that's occurring in the film. It was quite interesting. So I think, but you know, if we can get to that being, right, that the intrinsic value of human beings is in being, and that in being, the however you are being is exactly correct. So like all of, whether it's you're autistic or whatever you have, I got lots of mental health issues, which finally I'm starting to grapple with. By the way, the root cause of all my mental health issues, colonialism, but that goes without that's a separate issue. Not really, but it you know, adjacent. And so like I think we just need to get to that being part, and that like the way you be is it. That's it. That's you don't. That's enough. You don't have to do any more than that. And in fact, if we, I do this exercise because I do a lot of talking with non-Indigenous groups and folks. And so one of the things I ask them is, if you actually think about our world for a second, and imagine if we centered, because if you think of our world, we center doing constantly. Like we've built this, and this entire culture has built itself around us doing things, right? Like, why do roads exist? For us to get to do, like, it's only about the doing. They don't exist for us to be. They exist for us to get someplace to do something, right? And like I think of transit in Toronto, which is an ongoing nightmare for my entire life, but it's entirely built not around like how the community might travel to meet one another. It's entirely built around how can you get downtown to work. That is all we care about. It doesn't matter if you have to take a bus from like, because that's, but there's no office buildings along that route, so bus it is. You don't get to live like a human being, right, or whatever. And so everything is about doing. It's why we don't, like, it's why there's a historic, like we don't invest in anymore anyway, in like parks and like spaces that we can gather where you don't have to be a consumer to gather, right? Like we have very few of those. Like the library in the park is like basically it. Like that's not good. And so if we think of the world, if you stop for a second and say, what if we actually oriented it around being, what would the world look like? And one of the first things you should immediately clue in is that it would be accessible in a way it is not, right away. That's literally the first thing that pops in my head, is like, if we actually supported people's being, every building would have a ramp. Every single one would have a ramp. Like you would build it wouldn't be possible to conceive of not having a ramp on your building. You couldn't conceive of not having it accessible for people with blindness or deaf. Like it wouldn't be possible. And again, maybe I benefit from the Anishinaabe point of view. If you've ever been in an Anishinaabe community or a feast, I also tell folks this. What happens? Who eats first at an Anishinaabe feast? The women, the children, and the elders eat first. The men, the fully able-bodied men, eat last, dead last. Even if you're the hunter, you eat last in Anishinaabe feast. Why is that? Well, it's actually reflective of how Anishinaabe make any decision, which is the most vulnerable people first. Who are they? And what is that decision going to, how can it benefit them first? Because the thinking being, if it benefits them, the dude at the end of the line will be fine, right? Like they're taken care of, they're coming. So if we take care of these folks first, again, think of how our society would be reorganized. Again, accessibility, our schools and the supports for children would be radically different. We would have so much to make sure they're cared for. And we would in no way treat our elders like we do in this current society, like they're not worth anything because they've stopped working, which is the silliest thing ever. And of course, our language would be different. You're exactly right, Shelley, as well. Like we would just, conceive of everything differently. We wouldn't allow for wealth accumulation in the way that we've allowed it, because you would go, well, if we do that, then we're not supporting the being of everyone else, right? We're supporting your doing is more valuable than everyone else's being, and that ain't right. That's not the equation. It's supporting everyone's being. And we would also be thinking of the moment we're in, where we have this like vast technological advancement, all this stuff. And like, we're going to allow technology to create mass poverty instead of creating mass wealth. And what a dumb way to go. Like, if you had asked the Romans, like, step out of Indigenous world for a while. If you went to any Roman in ancient Rome and said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to create machines to do all the stuff that you do with like slave labor and all the other stuff. We're going to have machines do it, but we're going to still have poor people. They would go, what are you talking about? Like, you are going to have all the machines to do all this, and you won't just like have sex and eat and like hang around. Like, you won't just relax and be chilled, because they were pretty relaxed and chilled. The slaves weren't, but they other like, you know, and by the way, before they toppled, they invested in parks and all sorts of community infrastructure, and that's how everyone was happy. It's, yeah, we would be, it's bizarre to me that we're not in a moment of abundance globally, where we allow, if you're going to invent these goofy machines, then can they do the hard work and let us chill out? And if we have to buy stuff, why don't you make all the wealth that the machines generate, and we can use it to live? And yeah, why aren't we all chilling out? Like, it's so ridiculous. Instead, they're building robots. I saw some robot with a shotgun arrest a black person in the US this past week. I know, horrified looks. Google it. It happened. That's what they're building, because their society is built around the protection of the doing and the wealth accumulation that occurs in the doing. If you were centered around being, the idea you would ever build a robot to harm anyone would be inconceivable to you. Inconceivable to that mindset. So exactly, a cheese robot broke an 11-year-old's hand. I don't even know, that's scary. I don't even know anything about a cheese robot. I'm suddenly intrigued by a cheese robot, because despite my, of course, historic lactose intolerance, I do enjoy the cheese, much to the chagrin of literally everyone. But like, I would, yeah, I just think if we centered those things, if we shifted the framework of how we see it, we would make very different choices, because I don't think we have to live like we do now. Like, we've decided poverty's a choice. It's a very expensive one, right? To keep people poor. It's actually way cheaper to not have poverty, but they do it because it serves the system better to have poor people. Like, all of this stuff doesn't, I'll leave on this because I really should go to bed at some point, but I'll leave on this, which is one of the things I've learned really after the book through therapy, which is a lot of our folks who come with my sort of background, where you're Indigenous, but you're First Nations or whatever, but you also have non-Indigenous family. And it's often been described as something called two-eyed seeing, or that you have your foot in two canoes, right? This idea that we navigate the world through, we're able to have two lenses. I don't think that's true anymore. And I bought into it for a long time. I don't think that's true. Because I think when I look back on my life, I think a lot of the moments of confusion or misunderstanding are because I don't have two-eyed seeing. I'm Anishinaabe. So I see the world as an Anishinaabe person. I can't help it. It's the way I am. I have to. One of the lessons about being on Ojibwe enough from one of my elders was, you have to actually just accept that you just are Ojibwe and get over it. Like, you are Ojibwe. Everything you do is Ojibwe. You are what it is to be Ojibwe. Get over yourself. It's just the reality. So I was like, gotcha. And so I don't think I have two-eyed seeing. I think instead what I've been given is a pair of colonial prescription glasses. And I can put them on when I need to be able to understand and see and navigate those spaces and that worldview, or actually that world sense. There was a African woman philosopher, I should look up her name, I reference this all the time now, and she says we shouldn't use worldview because it's ableist, and it's actually colonial. World sense is much better, because Indigenous people didn't just rely on vision. We rely on all the senses. So world sense, you know, that I can put these glasses on and I can see and operate. I can go sit as chair of a crown corporation, a bizarre sentence to even utter, and I can make sense of it and do the work that is necessary and what I think is right. But when I leave those spaces, I can take them off. And when I take them off, I don't see the world. I see the world as an Anishinaabe. And it's very confusing. It doesn't make sense. It's a bit scary, and I don't know why humans would make decisions that seem so counter to humans. I don't know why we have systems that we are beholden to instead of are beholden to us. Like, why would we have a financial system that requires us to behave this way? Why wouldn't we have a financial system to serve us, not it? Why would we have any of these systems that serve it and not like it? None of it makes sense. And I realize, and sadly, I had to come to this realization as a middle-aged man, but I guess better late than never. Like, that is why I've felt sometimes in conflict with myself, with the outside world. It's why I was unreconciled, was because I kept believing that I somehow would be able to see two-eyed seeing, and I can't. I just can't. I can put on my glasses and I can navigate the world, but when I take them off, I'm just an Anishinaabe father and dad. I just see the world the way my ancestors probably would see the world right now, thinking the way. And I didn't grow up in my culture in that way, but I'm often confused about why and how I know certain things and why. But it's all been explained to me. It's because I'm Ojibwe and it just is what it is. So like whatever it's blood memory or however people want to think about it, whatever. But it is just the way I've always seen the world. Even when I was that little kid on the baseball diamond that I described in the opening of the book, I was an Anishinaabe kid wearing a pair of colonial glasses. I just didn't know it yet. And that's why I've had those feelings. It's why imposter syndrome, all of these things, and they still may pop up every once in a while. And now I remind myself, it's just the glasses. It's just the glasses. It's not anything that is actually a part of me. And so on the two-eyed scene, and I'd say this to anyone who's also in my situation where you have that mixed background, it's like, it's okay to accept that you don't actually have that capacity, that in fact, you can't see the world. I can't see the world the way my dad's family probably does. I just can't. And it causes some friction and some misunderstanding. Thankfully, they've, I think, mostly all read the book and understand much better. Even my aunt, who used to write horrible things in the Globe and Mail, has had a bit of an epiphany thanks to the book. And so it's, you know, and I think they understand like why maybe I've had difficulty with them, because I don't see the world in the same way. I see it the way I see it. And so, yeah, so I would encourage anyone who, my cousins out there who may have those similar feelings, it's just the glasses. Take them, take a deep breath, okay? Know that you are who you are, and that is the most valuable thing that you can be, is who you are, unabashedly. And no matter how you are, the way you are, whether it's like with me, mental health, yeah, I would call myself a large mammal in terms of my, you know, presence, very large mammal. That's who I am. And I've really come to try to accept that. And it's so hard. And I wish we could do it as kids. And sometimes I see other people who have managed to do that. I'm in awe of them, but that ain't me. It took me a long time. And Shelley, I hope you feel that same thing. And just know that is, colonialism does that trick to literally everyone. It sort of puts you outside of yourself. And the most, I'll leave on this, and I promise, Michelle, I am leaving on this. The most important decolonial work anyone can do is right here with yourself. In fact, you can't do the work outside of you until you've done this part. And the biggest part of that is to go into yourself and do exactly what Shelley's talking about, which is accept yourself, realize that you are so totally enough just as you are. You doing anything doesn't make you more or less of enough. That's what you would do. Who you be is the central part of it. And live your life like that. And I'm trying, I don't always succeed, but I'm trying to be present in that way and not wrapped up in my head and not always. And, you know, if we all can work on ourselves, it's the best thing we can do for each other, is to actually do this and then meet in that healed space, because we all have to heal from colonialism. And once we heal, meet in a very human way. Because again, I find it interesting for a lot of non-Indigenous people don't realize this, but like most Indigenous nations, you know what their names actually mean in their language? It means the people. For the vast majority of us, it's just the people, because it's just meant to differentiate us from our animal kin and the rest of the world. We're not, you know, it's not, it's the people. And if we could all meet again as people, as human beings, and actually understand that we're sharing an experience, and it's a human one. It's shared across our species, not divided by nationality or all these things we've created. It's actually the human experience, right? The fact that we dream the way we do, that we tell stories the way that we do, that's all us. That's original to us. Wolves don't do this. The hawk doesn't sit and tell stories. And the hawk, by the way, also doesn't wonder if it's being too much of a hawk or if it's enough of a hawk, right? It's the hawk knows fully well what it is. The wolf has never doubted. The wolf has never thought, maybe I'm a coyote. Never. It always knows it's a wolf. It's our big brain that does this. And part of it also is humbling that our big brain ain't that big. It's not that smart. Right? That all of that we have built, that it allows us to build, all the amount of environment it allows us to shape, isn't a testament to our strength. It's a testament to our weakness and our vulnerability. The wolf doesn't need a home, doesn't build a bike highway for itself, a grocery store to eat. When have you seen a wolf need a grocery store? It's fine. It doesn't. We need it because we're the weakest. Right? We're the weakest of the animals. So we actually need the most. But our brains make us think we're the top one, when in fact it's the other way. And if we actually understood that, and if we understood that the being is the thing, not the doing, because you think the wolf cares about the doing, the magic of the wolf is that while it's doing, it is being. That's the trick. That's the real trick, is that when the wolf is doing the wolf, it's being the wolf. We as animals are separate. We treat these things as somehow separate. And as the Anishinaabe, right, there's mind, body, spirit. This is all that we do the medicine wheel. This is all the same thing, which is it's all within us. We need to heal ourselves. That will allow us to heal each other and heal these things, allow us to confront these systems as humans with human eyes, not with system eyes. Not with conditioned eyes, so we can actually be blunt about what needs to be done. Because we do have to say just blunt things now, where we say we can't do that anymore. We can't, and so that's the big trick is all of us. And I would encourage you. And it took me therapy. Like I don't want to preach that I somehow did this on my own. It was major therapy. It was done with an Anishinaabe therapist, so that was a big help. And my status card paid for it. The best thing the status card has ever done in my life. If people don't know, you can get free therapy through your status card. They should pay. They damn right they should pay for our therapy with the status card. So everyone should go do that. It really is the best thing I ever did. Literally saved my life. I really mean that. Last year was a very dark year for me. It saved my life. And the big part of it, that when I think about all that therapy, it is the most decolonial work I've ever done. And you're talking to a guy who's worked in colonial systems and is working to change them. That pales into the work I've done on my own ability to understand my own position and where I am. And it's made the work I do outside so much better. It's made me understand what the Indigenous Screen Office is so much better because of that. So I'd encourage everyone, including all you non-Indigenous folks who are on this call, to do the same work, that you have also been conditioned to understand the world by colonialism. And that is not your inheritance to carry. It just isn't. You can also figure out, doesn't have to be like this. And boy, I wish we could all do that. Boy, I wish we could assemble a society that was about do no harm. Like we actually apply that principle like to everything, because we do so much harm all the time now. And if we centered humanity and what it is to be human and our experience on this planet, I think this can still be paradise. I honestly do believe that. I mean, hey, my community's on the North Shore of Lake Huron. If you've ever been there, it is paradise. Like, it is unbelievable. I get why my ancestors stopped there and didn't keep going to Florida. I'm not angry with them. Sometimes I'm very mad at them in January because we could have gone to Florida and they chose to stop. But, you know, I don't blame them. It's an extraordinary place. All of our ancestors, where they stopped in this place, you can tell. Like, I was in the Okanagan and with a very chatty driver, and he was naming all these places, and I said, I don't know what these names are, but I know this is a sacred place. I don't need to know. I can just see it and know that this is, people have prayed here to this place. Like, that's what this place is. And that is Canada. Like, people have prayed to every part of it because it is majestic and magical. And so I do still have, call me naive or whatever, but I still hold out hope that we can have paradise here. And it lies in us recognizing and accepting our own humanity, like being comfortable with it. And that would free us up to accept everyone else's and realize, why are we talking about what like, who cares what gender people want to identify with? Are they human? That's what matters. I don't care what pronouns they use. I don't care what mental health or whatever your health, it's human. It's you. I love it. That's where I want to be. I love everyone the way they are, just as they come. I hope we can all love each other in that same way. And if we, I guess I really want I want our dreams to dance again. I don't know I hope they haven't forgotten how to do that because of colonialism, but there was a time our dreams danced together. We could envision a world. And I hope we haven't forgotten, because now's the time to dream again and to have those dances. It's why telling each other stories is so important, because that's how those dreams dance together, right? I tell you the way I see the world, you tell me the way you see the world, and somewhere we can come up with something. And to me, that's, if I can get to the place where I can get back to imagining, and I have to say, I'm there. I can see how things can turn out different. And so I hope we can all get there and celebrate each other in the most human of ways. And so I want to say miigwech, 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 chi miigwech. I say it, thank you 4 times for all 4 directions. I want to thank everyone on this call for sharing so deeply. I'm very sorry I talked so long. Michelle should have warned you that I do rattle on. The book is short. I know, it's shocking given my verbiage, but the audiobook they were worried was going to be like 14 hours long. But I really appreciate the people reading the book and the responses. It's so gratifying to hear it. I love the fact that people bring themselves. When you're an artist, the best you can hope for is that people bring themselves to your art and find something of themselves in it. And it's so gratifying to hear that that's worked for people. And yeah, I hope you have a great day. And I thank you again, and all the love and everything to everyone. So miigwech.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you for coming. I can't thank you enough. I say Masi Cho in my language. Masi Cho, Masi Cho, Masi Cho, for coming and giving us so much of your time. And everybody stayed, so I wasn't cutting you off. No way. Next time on Native Calgarian, when I ask Jesse his thoughts on TikTok. Until then.
That's a whole other hour, Michelle.
Right? Right on. Thanks, Jesse, for coming.
Thank you all. Take care.
What an honor. Holy, I can't believe you just spent all that time with us. So I know it's later than normal, but I wasn't cutting them off. No way. So thank you all for coming. You can all unmute yourself and say what you want to say. And, you know, I apologize for being late, but I don't apologize that Jesse spoke as much as he did, because it was such an honor and a pleasure. So I see you're unmuted, Carol and Carrie and Marnie and Cynthia and Shelley. So yeah,
Just
thank
to
you all
say
for coming.
thank you.
No, we never got a chance to really meet, but thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Thank you. Shukran in my Arabic language. That
Thank
means
you.
shukran.
And thank you all for your great comments in the comment section too. I really appreciate it.
And I would like to say our next Settlers Book Club, we are reading Braiding Sweetgrass. And
Settler
that will
Book
be
Club?
Settlers Book Club. Yep.
When is that happening? I might want to join.
September 26th is the next date. I will put it in the chat. You can visit the website and get all the info. And
Is it
email
still through
me.
the library, Kat?
no, it would never, no.
They seem very restrictive.
Yeah.
Settlers
Okay,
Book
good.
Club
Thank you.
dot
Tom.
com. So I will see if I can join that, because I'm already busy with Native Calgarians Book Club. So I'll see if I
That's
can make
fine.
time for it. Okay.
That's great.
Bye.
And Michelle's next book club is about the, go ahead, chapters 5 and 6 of the
Missing.
MIWG report.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for creating this space. It's really,
Thank you.
really
Yeah, I agree.
appreciate it. I'm so glad I could be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for offering me to the book club. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, folks.
Good
thank
night,
you.
everybody.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Thanks, Michelle.
Michelle. Mwah.
Much appreciated.
Bye.
All right. So for folks who obviously can't read our comments because you are just listening on our podcast, most of the comments were, thank you for coming. I love the book. There was an interesting conversation that kind of happened that actually isn't relevant for the book club. But lots of folks who even messaged me to say thank you. I think this one's important. Jesse, thank you, Jesse. Your words and honesty are greatly appreciated. Many Canadians know very little about Indigenous life and experiences. So for folks who are still on, I can't actually see you. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, that would be great as I finish off my podcast. So one of the folks said, thank you, Jesse. Your words and honesty are greatly appreciated. Many Canadians know very little about Indigenous life and experiences. Your book has a strong voice and is important for all Canadian settlers to hear. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you, Michelle. But lots of conversation, just basically saying thank you. And normally our book clubs are not this long. So what I will likely do is put this book club into 2 parts so that folks can listen to it in an appropriate segment. And I'll of course end by saying my exit, and my exit is just coming up here. All right. So some things that I didn't say that I normally say in the intro is that it's really important land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage all to introduce themselves with their acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, and how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you don't know how to pronounce your local Indigenous nation's name, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around for my community, my family, and myself. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101, because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians, or whatever town you're from, show me that you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Wente's book, Unreconciled, chapter 13 and pages 180 to 181 explain it perfectly. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake people in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the Hare people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is a visitor to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene, or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ plus community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft, which I feel Jesse just explained quite well. As a Dene woman who has attempted to run after joining harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow incarceration, the denial of justice, denial of mental health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have worked to continue, reports to advocate for, and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I can't say have a great pride when I know that my community is dying from current drug policies and systems of imposed Christian-based drug policies, abstinence programming, private healthcare, and private justice systems built on racism, land theft, and imposed British constructs that continue genocide on Indigenous people. I think a lot about a lot of the folks that I've mentioned just recently this year, from Frank Young to former Liberal candidate Dawn Dumont Walker. She has been found, as well as her son, Vinnie Jansen. But now, unfortunately, we have a whole new legal battle that is ridiculous and disappointing and shows us exactly how far we still have to go. As for folks who don't know, there's something called the J Treaty, which is supposed to allow Indigenous people to cross the international border. And with the Royal Commission on, or the RCMP and the Saskatoon Police, with a long history of being abusive to Indigenous women, now she's forced to fight a legal battle. So please follow her, and please follow that and continue your work as a settler. The police claim that there's no foul play suspected, but anyway, I think of them today. I hope we honor their lives. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation. I honor the Blackfoot elders and members as they've been kind to me on my Red Road journey. Coincidentally, Elder Red Crane, it's his birthday today, happy birthday. He taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Satudene. And truthfully, that's just our name, but we say spirit name to try to help Canadians understand a cultural teaching that I'm not willing to teach you because you've already stolen too much from us. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. Any mistakes or misinterpretations will be on me. I encourage questions so that misunderstandings can be cleared up as soon as possible. I don't speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share what I know as I walk down my red road. I've been accused of not being kind while surviving genocide, that I've given free book clubs, podcasts, and info on my social media for years, as have so many other of the Indigenous community. At this point, it is willful to be ignorant on these issues of oppression dynamics. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. I'm so grateful for Jesse to be on my show. I really encourage folks to look at their year coming up, because a lot of folks plan September until the end of the school year. And I ask you to look into a local Indigenous book club. You're welcome to join mine. But as you've seen, I prefer Indigenous people speak first, because non-Indigenous have stolen the time that we have ever gotten with ourselves. We have less than 1 million of us registered, and yet non-Indigenous still take up all the space. So I ask that you consider your place in all of this, but do try to learn. Push your companies on anti-oppressive training, anti-racism training, and Indigenous education. Challenge your community associations, your sports clubs, whatever it is you spend your free time on. I don't see land acknowledgements in emails. I know you have absolutely zero Indigenous training. So if you are interested, anybody is welcome to join my book club. My hope is that you will make space for Indigenous people and respect that. So September 12th, we have the National Inquiries, chapters 5 and 6 from volumes 1A. And then on October 10th, we have Res Rules by Clarence Louis. On November 14th, we have the National Inquiry, chapter 7 and 8. And then on December 12th, we have Standoff by Bruce McIver. Another thing that I'm really proud to be a part of is something called the Reconciliation Action Group. We have many settlers that actually do the work there. I mean, you've seen Kat from our settler book club. So if there is another book club I'd encourage you to consider, it would be the Settlers Book Club, or start one in your own. If you're a teacher, have a Friday lunch that is devoted to a book you all read, and go from there. I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and included cultural safety and cultural first aid in all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous people of color, those with disabilities, and LGBTQ2+ to speak. I want to say thank you to authors Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fridkin of heretohelp.bc.ca about their piece on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. Their work are those cultural action tools that I have said hundreds of times in my podcast. So please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to repeat and highlight them here. Internalized racism or lateral violence, it's a form of oppression dynamics that those who are on the bottom of the oppression dynamic ladder experience. It's another form of violence that have been imposed on these lands. And if you go to racialequitytools.org, Donna Bevins has created What is Internalized Racism? There's so many resource files there. I highly encourage them, if you come from an oppressed group, to go through them to try to understand the intersectionalities of oppression that you are experiencing. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. If you see or experience racism, you can go to this, and this will help you understand how to do different interventions that help everybody. So you go to afsc.org. They have a resource area, and it says do's and don'ts for bystander intervention. Literally, if you Google it, there's tons of resources out there. If you see or experience racism in Alberta, report it to acttoendracism.ca. You can actually text at 587-507-3838. Indigenous have been sharing and talking about the issues, our traumas in reports, commissions, and in public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with gender equity plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay-straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that party directly negatively impacts marginalized people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform and violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. Denying those reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in the educational and health and justice institutions, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. They don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism. They have zero business running. This should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, etc. And actually, I feel Jesse spoke about it really well, about how poverty is a choice. A really great article I said out loud is Truth Before Truth, How Non-Indigenous Canadians Become Allies. If you literally Google it, you will find oodles and oodles of resources. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about and want to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness Helpline at 1-855-242-3310. It is toll-free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also, if you go onto their website, they have a text option. So you go to hopeforwellness.ca. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. It is also a toll-free 24/7 crisis call line. Non-Indigenous, there are usually distress centers lines in your area, possibly a functioning 211, or you can call 833-456-4566. In Alberta, we have a 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta. You can go to ssisa.ca. We actually here locally are going to be having an event in October to honor one of my colleagues' dreams. Actually, she is a 60 scooper and she is going to be having an event. It's going to be on a Sunday here in Calgary, and I want to say it's the October 16th. So look for the poster. We'll send it out here shortly. And there's a group of us from the committee that are super excited to talk about it. It's called Healing Our Spirits. So another event I hope you all consider joining. Before that will be the Sisters in Spirit Vigil on October 4th. Before that will be the National Day on Truth and Reconciliation, which will be September 30th. And we also have Calgary Pride coming up on September 4th, which I'm super excited about. So the following are 2S LGBTQ2+ supports available in most areas across Canada. If you're in crisis, please go to lifevoice.ca. There's a trans lifeline in Canada at 877-330-6366. And the Trevor Project's LGBTQ youth line is 866-466-7386. And of course, go to lifevoice.ca and get some more crisis supports if those aren't applying to you. It is really important that folks understand, and Jesse said it again in the topic about poverty, it is important to understand that if you know someone that is using substances, to not use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 1-888-688-NORS for support. And there's 2 apps you can also download called Brave or DORS. So please consider that. We have more drug poisonings, the statistics that just came out, unfortunately, and every death is completely preventable. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This podcast is self-care, how I take my power and my voice back, how I reclaim my space. I just like to speak freely without interruption, tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions. And I think Jesse's book Unreconciled really shows all of these things. It is unacceptable anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism and gatekeeping, and folks that survive off the status quo who are really in their trauma. Understanding internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, Indigenous people, folks with disabilities, and the QT BIPOC community, everyone. Masicho to my ancestors, to my granny, to my mom of what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be blunt and strong, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and stepping up, teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I'm a second generation proud Calgarian. my husband, Big Buffalo Rockman, for producing and editing the show on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and support down my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, Thunderpipe Necklace Woman, who we are blessed to learn from daily, I'm honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. My hope is my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they'll understand down the road. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. To those that cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcast, pin posts on social media. And if you'd like me to come and speak to your company on Indigenous education. And I like to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not Tradish. And my beautiful cousin responded, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you, everybody, for being a part of today's book club and for being a part of this show. All the best, Masi Cho.